I will time you on this. It rings at the end. We've got a fairly long night, so would ask everyone to be respectful of that time. If anyone does need or want language assistance, then we can extend the time for that as well. So the first public speaker is someone who's quite familiar with the process. So Dean, you're up first.
Oh, really?
Yep.
My son was told me I'm not old, you're emeritus. So maybe that's it. Okay.
Now you got to set a good example on the time, okay?
I always do. I'm here to speak on the amendments. I'm in favor of all of them. But I want specifically to talk about the Simpson Street with all my friends behind me here. So I agree with both of these. The amendment and the reasons for it are clearly stated better than I did, so thanks, Nikki. And then I also agree that it's time for a permanent contract. And I don't know why it hasn't been done before, so here's why I want this one to happen. This 30 grand will be in support of the Simpson, or the Broadway Street Center that they use. And then what you'll be saying to the administration, say, okay, look, get a contract with these folks with using the outcomes that they already have, and in light of the conversations that we had just recently around the questioning around the partnerships that we do have, and going, you've been around for a long time, you're wonderful people, it's a great program, but where's the results? Well, Simpson Street's sitting around right behind me here. They've been having the results showing the progress on the MAP scores ever since they've been there. So the point of what I was trying to do with this proposal was, let's make the contract happen by doing it this way. Then your group can get with them and set up a permanent contract with new outcomes, with an expansion of this program that we know by what they've done over the years works. It's showing us that everyone they're working with improves on their MAP scores. We don't see that in many of our other partnerships that we're giving money to. We're not giving a dime to these folks, so let's bring them in and hold them up and say, what are you guys doing? Let's learn from them and then pass it on to these others. So that's why I'm saying, I don't know why the contract hasn't happened already, but you guys can say, make it happen. And then get it done by November, so when you start the next budget cycle, it can be in there already, so we don't have to come back here and talk about this. This one that works, great community support, kids love the program, 12 months out of the year, there's no slide over the summer, they keep it going, MAP scores are showing improvement in everything. Let's show them a little love. So I'm done, right?
Thank you, Dean.
Under?
Well done.
Okay.
Good job. Angie Oler. Sorry, it's tight in here tonight, guys. Oh, that's right. Hi. I just wanted to talk a little bit about allocations to Leopold School. I understand that the classroom sizes given to Leopold are within the optimal range, according to the board. But with Leopold's uniqueness at having very poor teacher retention, it doesn't seem like a very good idea to have the class sizes as large as they are. And specifically in the plan for next year, we're losing 3 classroom teachers, and then our principal is going to be adding 1 back with Title I funding, and therefore using the Title I funding for a teacher means that we're not going to get Title I funding for our support services. So next year we're going to have the only reading interventionist we will have will be 0.5 at a school of 700 students, which 70% of them are reading below grade level. So we're asking that we get our classroom teachers back so that we can release our Title I funding to be used for our reading interventionist and our support staff. We're also asking, this year we had a floating sub which was fabulous because about 3 to 4 of our staff at Leopold are absent every day. And when that happens, many of the times the teachers have to join their kids in already huge classes, and the kids basically lose an educational day, which is really sad. So that was nice for this year. But so if we could get our classroom teachers back that we had this year, we're losing one at 4th grade and 2 at 5th grade. The 5th grade ELI is the one that she's going to be adding back with Title I funding. We also ask that you look at how you allocate support services to schools, not based on size or need, but based on one school being the same as another. We would really appreciate there being some more budget consideration to making it more equitable. Thank you.
Thank you. Karen Lowen?
Hi. So my name's Karen Lowen, and I'm here to follow up on what Angie just talked to you about. I'm a parent of 2 students at Leopold Elementary. So one of the students, her name is Ruby. She's in 3rd grade. She'll be going into 4th grade next year. I was actually in front of the board 2 years ago advocating for reading interventionists at that school when we were slated to once again lose them, right during the time where I was reaching out for help, trying to figure out why Ruby couldn't read, and was, I don't want to say I was getting the runaround from that school, but I understood that there was just a lot of need there, and it meant Ruby was not getting what, they were just having a hard time finding time for her. But I can report now, 2 years later, that she has been diagnosed in this time as having dyslexia. So she has some reading issues, and she has been getting some intervention this year. And it works. She made the largest gains in her whole class in reading and her MAP scores this year. So she's not reading at grade level yet. She can. It is well known that appropriate intervention teaches kids to read. And if kids can't read, they do poorly in their communities, they do poorly in their jobs. It leads to Madison not working like we want it to work. And yet, if they get the support they need, they can be doctors. They can do anything they want. And so, okay, Ruby needs reading intervention, and I hear she's maybe not going to get it next year. She's also going into 4th grade, which is a grade that is slated to lose a teacher. So she needs differentiation. The school is struggling. Ruby's not the only one. There's lots of kids there that need reading intervention, and they need teachers to have time to differentiate in the class. And when you have so many kids in your class, you can't do that differentiation, and these kids can't get the extra support that they need. Then I have a second daughter who's May. She's in 5th grade this year. She's kind of the opposite of Ruby in that she excels at everything. And she had a great year and is so sad to be leaving Leopold. She had Mrs. Peterson this year, who was a new teacher, brand new, and May really wanted Mrs. Pilliard, because Mrs. Pilliard is one of these teachers at the school that's fantastic. And she had some interaction with her, and when she found out she didn't get Mrs. Pilliard, she cried. Now at the end of the year, she's so glad she got Mrs. Peterson, because Mrs. Peterson is spectacular. So now these 2 really strong teachers that we have at this school, really great teachers at a school that loses really good teachers all the time, are going to be thrown in with, they're going to have a whole extra class next year because the 3rd teacher is leaving because we don't have the funding for that teacher. And so this seems like these teachers are going to go, our greatest teachers are going to go if we don't get these extra classroom teachers.
Thanks, Karen. Diane Wodzinski?
Good evening. I am here. I'm an SCA. I work at Chavez Elementary. I am here for the base wage increase. With our team that we have at Chavez Elementary, we're a great team. We know exactly what we're doing. We like our jobs. We're very, very good at our jobs. We're well trained at our jobs. We're part of the only group in the school that does the NVCI training, the nonviolent crisis training, and we're only part of the smaller groups that are also asked to do first response, first aid and CPR training in the school. We're a very needed group, and what we need is to feel valued, and what we need is the respect. And so how we want that is the base wage increase, please. We need it. We have so many people in our group that have second jobs. Of our group, 70% of our group have a second job. Of that 70%, 40% even have a second job on top of that one. So they have 3 jobs to support themselves. They need to feel valued. They need to stay there. They need that job. They need that 2.44%. They want to stay in their job. They love their job. Can you imagine if we don't have this great group at Chavez Elementary? If you don't have people that want to be at a school because they don't feel valued and they don't even get the little respect of getting this basic wage increase, you're going to lose us. And then where are you going to be? We're not going to have great SCAs there. You're not going to have the ones that care about the NVCI training. They're not going to do the things that the school wants them to do. They're going to take it into their own hands if judgment may come. We have to be very careful with what we do with our students, first of all, being an SCA. And sometimes we don't feel valued just from the school itself. We're just an SCA. So if you could just value us and give us that basic wage increase, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Stan. Jennifer Myris?
Hi there. Thank you for letting the public speak today. I'm Jennifer Myris. I live in Madison. I have 3 kids who have attended Madison West, currently attend. I'm here to speak about the West sports facilities and the 2020 apparent referendum, or what's moving toward a referendum. I just want to say sports matter to people, regardless of your personal view of sports. They build community. They link, and the link between sports, keeping kids engaged in school and academic success is well documented. People want their kids to be able to practice and compete in sports in a safe, effective, and fun environment that they can be proud of. Right now, we have a real serious disparity in facilities between Madison West and the other Madison schools, not to mention disparity between West and suburban schools who are building mega schools and have great sports facilities. I feel like we're at a crossroads, whether we're going to invest in Madison West and MMSD facilities, and parents will make choices to allow their kids to play sports regardless of socioeconomic, national origin, or racial background to excel in the sports in which they participate. That's already happening. I think West is past that crossroads. I'm a mom of 3 swimmers, and I'd like to just address the swim facility at West quickly. My family's been part of the Madison West swim community since 2013. You may or may not know, Madison is a weird hotbed of swimming. We have produced many Olympians here and many Division I swimmers. But just as important, and just as important to me, swimming has to be a sport that is accessible to more kids. And when our swimming pool, that is a tiny 6-lane pool that causes many injuries because arms hit each other, kids hit each other's heads, concussions happen constantly. When we can only have 30 plus kids in that pool, we are having an exclusionary team. We are not including kids. It is not inclusionary. We see it across our conference. The schools that have bigger pools have teams that are more diverse and can include more kids. I think that's a crime. I really would like to see that change. Okay? Second, I just want to address the facility itself. I'm not here as some whiny parent to say this isn't some elite pool. all right? This pool is in utter disrepair and is in an absolutely unacceptable state. Kids are getting asthma, their hair is falling out, tiles are gouged out in the locker rooms where people get cut, a bathroom door, two of the bathroom, I think there's 2 functioning toilets. Doors fall off hinges, almost hit a kid 2 years ago. I would really urge you to take a serious look at the facilities, no matter what your motivation, inclusion or safety. I think it's very important. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joni Messner?
Hello, thank you for having me again. I've been here before, but I'm going to speak again because we have welcome to the new board members. I am here to speak about the West High School facilities and the 2020 referendum. I am an alumni of Madison West High School, and as well as my husband, and we have 4 kids, some there, some coming, some have graduated. I would like to urge you to please look at the referendum and let West get a field house and a swimming pool. Some of the same things that Jen was talking about. For a field house, we do not have enough gym space right now for gym classes, for MSCR, for anything, or for a nice gathering place for kids that need a place after school before they're going home or whatever. So anybody could use this. One of our gyms has unsafe floors. There's multiple uses for a new field house, PE classes, MSCR, all the sports, fall, winter, spring sports. Some kids don't have the means to get to other facilities, you know, for a bus or whatever the situation is, so they have to choose not to do a sport because kids have to go to other places for sports other than our high school. It could be used for summer training and, again, for a gathering place for many kids. Pool, I do have some swimmers, and just as Jen spoke about, our pool is too small. It was built as a 5-lane, now it's a 6-lane. Kids are hitting. My own daughter has chronic shoulder issues because she's a butterflyer and can't actually do it the correct form. It's not wide enough. There's also head injuries. Kids are getting cut, and I feel like there's missed opportunities, like the inclusionary thing that Jen was talking about. We'd like more be able to not have cuts. And the bigger the pool, the more kids that can participate. And I think we all know there's a direct correlation with participating in sports and doing well in life, and maybe getting scholarships for college. Whatever opportunities come from that, learning life lessons. The air quality, like she said, kids are losing their hair. There's a Madison West pool asthma. The kids only have it there, no other pools. There's even a girl who passed out last year due to the air quality in there. The locker rooms, the lockers are rusted out at the bottom. There's mice that come through. Every piece of food they bring in there has to be in a container that cannot be opened. And the kids have to eat breakfast in there every day after practice. The showers are broken. There's 2 showers that work for 30 girls. The showers come to here, so they're bending down, trying to get under a shower. They're just completely not, they're supposed to get ready for a day of learning in that environment. I think I was also going to directly affect the education opportunities because kids have to travel to Hamilton, MATC, Cherokee. They can't meet with a teacher after school, so they have to choose, should I meet with a teacher or go to my practice? So it affects their education. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Anderson?
So, sure you can read my shirt. Where am I going?
Yep.
My name is Sarah Anderson, and I have kids at West High School and Hamilton Middle School. I'm also on the board of the Madison West Athletic Booster Association. As many student athletes, parents, and lesson goers have spoken about the extremely poor air quality in the pool, one parent even spoke about at the board meeting that her child was taken away in an ambulance, and that's what Joni had just mentioned. And that it was designed as a 5-lane pool, and now it had to be WIAA compliant in order for us to participate, and it was made into a 6-lane pool, which means our lanes are too small. This not only affects our swim team, it affects the open lap swimming, the master's swim program, and these are all MSCR programs that can be prorated for low-income people. Also, Madison West cannot host any Red Cross trainings because of our pool isn't big enough. Leopold is the only one that's able to do that. So the MMSD pools are used for our high school swim teams, but the main purpose of them is MSCR. So that's how I would like to speak about the equity question regarding these pools. Our 4 pools have youth lessons throughout the year, Monday through Thursday in the summer, and it is hundreds of lessons. Just to show you, this is lap, this is east, this is all the lessons, Monday through Thursdays, Saturdays, adult open lap swim. This is La Follette, because it does the Red Cross courses, it doesn't have quite as many. This is Memorial, and this is West. So our pools are used constantly. They're overused. That's why they're in such bad shape. They're supposed to be replaced at 30 years, and they've been on many more years than that. So we would love to be able to host more Red Cross trainings, lifeguard training. Kids that we have our swimming community go to Milwaukee to get this training because we don't have the facilities to do it. MSCR would be able to bring back its water polo team, water ballet, if we were to build a diving well. We don't have a diving well, so we currently rent from Middleton and Sun Prairie for diving. And we have kids that come out of the Madison community and belong to the other communities so they can do these programs that we are unable to offer. If we build a new high school at West, the community would benefit. All of our high schools are rented out for all of these club sports and all of these other ballet and that type of stuff, water ballet and stuff. So we would be able to do that. We would be able to make more revenue. We'd be able to host meets. We'd be able to have our divers on site, which is obviously a large concussion issue that we've had hurt divers that we have absolutely no trainer on site for them. This would bring people from all over the Midwest. If clubs and our own swim teams were able to host meets, there's a Midwest meet that's hosted, would bring thousands of people to the city of Madison. It would increase revenues all around, not let alone MMSD's revenues. Thanks.
Thanks, Sarah. Doug Keeler.
Hello, folks. Thanks for the time. Thanks for being here tonight. I've had the ability to meet with each of you in the past couple months to talk about this, so I'm not going to take a lot more time tonight. Respect for other folks here who want to have this opportunity before you. But this is an important time for us as you are concluding your budget recommendations, right? You're going to be voting to finalize this budget soon here. We know the state budget is going to be finalized by the end of the month. And I'm talking about base wage bargaining. Right. So right now we're trying to wrap up our base wage bargaining. I think everybody here already understands that issue. Employees are seeking a cost of living increase, which is 2.44%. MTI is representing about 4,000 district employees, teachers, EAs, SEAs, clerical, technical folks, security assistants, substitute teachers. We're also bargaining in tandem with the building trades unions, who represent the painters, carpenters, plumbers, electricians. AFSCME Local 60, who has the custodial maintenance staff. So we go all on this together, and we've done this the last few years. And where we're going into this bargaining is going in with the demand that everyone receive a cost of living pay increase. I've had 2 bargaining sessions so far. I think, as you folks know, the district is still at 0.5%. We're at cost of living. We want to get this wrapped up, and we want to get a cost of living soon. The school year ends on Wednesday. Summer school is going to be starting shortly thereafter. We have folks who are going to be engaging in second and third jobs this summer. We'd like to send people out with a settled contract, not thinking that this issue is going to be pending over the summertime as next school year approaches. You're going to be hiring an interim superintendent, a regular superintendent, right? We got big loads ahead to carry there. We're talking about a building referendum next year. We want to get this behind us and move on. So just encouraging the board. I know that Chris Carusi has a proposal out there for you folks to consider, or encouraging you folks again to look at this and do what you can to get this resolved and cost of living pay increase for district employees. Last thing I'll say, a number of things on your agenda tonight that speak to kind of some of the challenges the district's facing. Our need to attract and retain more staff of color, the need to attract and retain and keep more special ed staff, right? Providing a cost of living base wage increase does not resolve any of those problems, but failing to provide all employees a cost of living pay increase is going to exacerbate that problem. You're going to have more people leaving. It's going to be harder to attract folks. So let's get this one done now. We got a lot of other issues that we are willing to work with you folks on collaboratively, but we want to bring this to closure. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Doug. Assad?
Good evening. If you take a psychologist, a mother, a father, a coach, a brother, a sister, and an uncle, you'll get a school security assistant. From the day your children walk in the building to the time they walk out, we're the first and last thing they see each and every day. Many ways we have uplifted, supported, enveloped, and talked up and down off the cliff your children. We in Madison and we in America say the most important thing in our lives is our future, which we say our children are. So someone please tell me how the most underpaid staff in a school system is security. 8.5 months we work in the school system. 3.5 months we're expected to be destitute. For 3.5 months we do not make any money and we can't get unemployment because of insurance. So how do we say we value children when we do not value the people we watch that watch the children? How do we tell ourselves? How do we tell ourselves there can be any children in the building and not security? And we hear these fights over budgets. How do we say our most precious resource, children, aren't protected by the people who love these children? We start at less than $17 an hour. Walmart pays $15. Our most important resource in this world is children, and yet we don't make any money. No dignity, invalidated each and every day, and we do this because we love it. But if we say we truly honor America's children, the people who support and watch and protect should be supported, watched, and protected also. In the school systems, the drama and the trouble is not in the schools. Those of you who want this narrative of violent, teeming schools, those are lies. We have some of the most intelligent, diverse, high-level thinking children in all of this country. We love our jobs. The trouble is going to come from the outside. And we in security know each and every day, without a drop, we would treat your children like they are our children. We would die for everybody's children in here. Not that we want to, but give us some dignity. How do you say to anybody, 8.5 weeks, 8.5 months, you mean something. 3.5 months, you mean nothing. No Christmas holidays. Thanksgiving is paid, but how do you say that to us? How do you come in here and shake our hands and say we do a good job, and for 3.5 months you don't care how we live and how we feed our children? There is no way that should happen. 16 something an hour for 8.5. Come on now. The most impressive thing about our school systems, about this country, is our children. Buildings with functions and activities in it and no security. This cannot be a situation and a question and a battle over budgets when we're talking about children. I just want us to think about that carefully. Thank you.
Thank you. Gary Mahoney.
Hello. I'm here to speak about the 2020 referendum for our 4 high schools. Last Monday evening, we held a community forum at West High, led by Dr. Brand, so I'll just touch on a few highlights. I have a graphic here that a number of the returning board members have seen, but I think for the benefit of the new members, I'll just touch on some of the highlights. West and East, to a lesser extent, are landlocked. MMSD had the Rattler Corporation assess the outdoor athletic facilities at all 4 of our high schools. West only has 17 acres compared to 30 at East, 56 at Leopold, and 76 at Memorial. Out of the 24 categories, Memorial has 23, Leopold has 19, East has 11, and West only has 3, not 4 as shown in the graphic. West has the largest enrollment. We're likely at or near the top of the number of student athletes, and arguably we have the least amount of facilities. We have a serious competitive disadvantage, at West, as several of our student athletes must travel just to practice, let alone compete. We'll never be equal, but help us get us closer to equality. The current plan does provide for a new pool, but it does not include a field house. The Stevens Gym is our main gym. It is not a field house. West is the only high school without a field house. As much as we need a new pool, and that's been well documented in tonight and several other meetings previously, we need a field house more, which will provide a broader appeal. The need for a field house is 1A, and the pool is 1B. We would also ask if you consider relocating the proposed Ash Street addition to the Van Nuys side of the school or the current side of the Van Heist gym. Our Van Heist gym is undersized. Even if the floor was in better condition, it has limited utility. One of our community members at large, Martha Vukelik Austin, spoke, and she supported most of the items, but she concurred that the proposed Ash Street addition is not a good solution, so we should look at alternatives. One other interesting point I'd like to bring up, everyone is familiar with the buy local movement. I think this referendum affords us an opportunity to develop a play local movement. We have a lot of travel teams in all sports these days, so let's keep some of our hard-earned money closer to home, host a wide variety of tournaments. Let's work with our coaches, the City of Madison, MMSD, MSCR, the YMCA, the Madison Area Sports Commission. Let's improve our indoor courts, our rinks, our outdoor fields, as well as Mansfield and Lucier stadiums. Madison is a great host city, and we have the potential to host a wide variety of tournaments for all of our sports. Thank you.
Thank you. Jackie Cooper.
Hi, my name is Jackie Bastier Cooper. I'm a parent at West High School, and I'm here to speak about the facilities proposal. Your 2015 research showed that 2 or more years of participation in high school athletics resulted in significant increase in graduation rates district-wide. If you really want to make a difference in graduation outcomes, shouldn't you find ways to increase participation in athletics district-wide? West needs a field house added to their facility proposal. It will provide additional space for student athletes, gym classes, as well as additional space and funding for after-school MSCR activities. I think you also need to think about what specifically is being renovated in these proposals. What innovative changes do the proposals make to the high schools? From the district's website, you state, the MMSD is committed to ensuring that every school is a thriving school that prepares every student to graduate high school well-equipped for college, careers, and their community. How will you do that if you are renovating the facilities for today without thinking about the future? Verona is thinking about the future. Sun Prairie is thinking about the future. MMSD needs to think about the future needs of the high schools, because if you just fix the schools, MMSD will continue to lag behind in what the high schools are able to offer to incoming families and to those who are looking to move into the district. When I read the proposal, you're asking taxpayers to fund over $110 million worth of deferred maintenance. There is nothing innovative about that. As much as it is needed, how are you going to explain why the maintenance was not done sooner or scheduled over time? If we remove the deferred maintenance from the proposal, that only leaves $170 million to make major improvements at 4 aging high schools. Sun Prairie approved $164 million, DeForest $125 million, Verona $163 million for one school. As an example, the proposals want to spend $10 million to renovate the 4 high school welcome centers. These are literally areas where students and visitors enter the school during daytime hours after the first bell has rung. But the plan only wants to spend a total of $12.3 million, only $2.3 million more than the Welcome Center renovations, to update science labs, pathways spaces, and fine arts. This is saying that you want to spend a huge chunk of money for a Welcome Center. Please think for the future, for what the kids in the elementary schools will need and the children who haven't even been born. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison Schwartz.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm Allison Schwartz. I'm the athletic trainer at West High School. I feel like I should just explain my position just a little bit, since it's kind of a unique role. I'm actually a UW Health employee, but I work in the high school. There's one of us at each high school. My job is essentially like a primary care access for all of our athletes for their medical needs. I prevent, manage, treat, diagnose, make referrals, I spend a lot of my time planning for emergencies, things like that, to make sure our athletes are getting the medical care that they need. It's a very busy job every single day. I see countless, I do count, I have to keep track for UW Health, but I see lots of athletes, and when I'm busy in the fall, I can easily see 40 in an afternoon, several hundred a week. Very normal for me. So a lot of these kids their first access and maybe their only access to healthcare is through the athletic trainer. Our facilities at West are a huge issue from a medical and safety standpoint. Right now, more than half of our athletes have to practice either off-site or after hours, after 6 p.m., 7 p.m., things like that. It's a huge safety risk, and I think you can just imagine whether it's a concussion or a serious fracture, some type of emergency, or even just a simple ankle sprain. Think about what a kid's experience is like if it happens at 4:30 at West when I'm around, or if it happens at 7:30 p.m. Because at gymnastics practice at Memorial and nobody's there. Think about how different it would be as a parent to get a phone call or not, things like that. So right now, 45% of our athletes have access, but 55% don't. The addition of a field house and a better outdoor facility that our athletes could actually use would bring that number up to 75%, and that's huge. And these are issues that the other Madison schools have not had to even think about. They don't have to worry about whether or not their kid is going to have access to the athletic trainer because they have a field house. They can stay on site. Another issue that sometimes people wouldn't be aware of is if the 4 or 5 girls are carpooling out to softball practice, and the driver of the car is the one who is hurt or needs to see their teacher after school, the whole car is sitting in my office waiting, and that somehow, suddenly that coach can't start the practice. It's a huge problem. It leads to a lot of different just headaches and tension between staff and, battles over space and things like that. The pool has been well covered tonight, but it's important to mention that if the pool doesn't move out of that space and we're very limited on space, then academics can't expand into that space that it's vacating. If you look at those plans, they need that space for classrooms. Those are big locker rooms that aren't really being used because they're in such disrepair. I'd encourage you to look up a study done by Tim McGuine recently. He's a researcher at UW. He's done a number of studies, but one of them was on concussion management and high and low access to an athletic trainer. The numbers are pretty significant. Thanks.
Thank you. Amit Paul.
So hello, my name is Amit Pal, and I must admit I was slightly confused by the question of are you representing a particular group? In a certain sense I am, and that's why I'm wearing this t-shirt, but I'm not part of the staff, and the reason I'm here on behalf of Simpson Street Free Press is because my daughter Devika, who's in 8th grade, she's a paid staffer, or at least a writer if you will. But that's not the reason I'm here, even though that's important also, and we can come back to that. Devika has been with Simpson Street Free Press now for a year and a half or so. And I can tell you this, and it's of course not all the press, but there's been such a marked improvement in her writing skills, in her analytical abilities, in her research abilities. She's written on a range of issues for the paper over the last year and a half, from World War II POWs in Wisconsin, to science issues, to Mahatma Gandhi and King. And, and really she's benefited such a tremendous amount that, that can't be expressed. And I've seen that over the past year and a half. And it's really important. And, in the summer, for example, she'll be interning with Dane County Land and Air through Simpson Street Free Press, and we're really proud of that. And certainly the fact that they are, and we return to the whole paid thing, that they're able to pay all the students a stipend is so important. You can't imagine how eager and enthusiastic she is. It's not a big amount for us, but for her it's a huge amount. And the fact that at 13 and 14 she's getting paid a stipend, and if you all are able to fund Simpson Street Free Press, it'll ensure A, that it keeps on going, and B, it keeps on continue to pay all the students, which is such a rarity for kids that age. And if I may add something that may sound a bit like, tooting my horn, I know journalism. I was the managing editor of the Progressive magazine for a long time, and certainly, the skills that they've taught Devika, it would have taken me a long time to impart them to her, and I'm really appreciative and grateful. They take such good care of the kids too, they know these are children, and they can't sort of, work even for a good number of hours without getting at least a bit fed, a bit pampered. And I'm telling you, she loves going there, and we look forward to having her there in the summer. My mother and my uncles and aunts are coming from India, and the fact that she'll be there for a good portion of a day writing for Simpson Street Free Press is something that's almost unimaginable to them. When I told my mother that, that she'll be going to the office, so to speak, every week. So I would urge you all to really to fund Simpson Street Free Press to the fullest extent possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Charles Hua?
Hi everyone, my name is Charles Hua. I was a 2018 graduate of the district. So I actually had a chance to go to the West High Town Hall Community Forum, and it's just so weird being back as an alumnus. But I just wanted to speak on the 2020 referendum really quick. And one of the things that I think has been missing from the reports is some of the renewable energy and energy efficiency opportunities that the district can really take on. And I think there are three sort of key arguments why it's such a winning proposition. First is just $280 million is a lot, and if we're thinking about planning long-term, one of the best ways to make up for that upfront capital is through these investments, because that's going to save hundreds of thousands, if not millions, for the school district over such a long period of time, 30 years. Next is sort of the educational opportunities. The fastest growing job right now is solar technician. The second fastest growing job is wind energy installer, and so these are perfect opportunities. If we're talking about preparing students for the workforce, great opportunities to connect them to what interests them and also what the job market values right now. And lastly, just the amount of community support. And so I applaud, first of all, the board for establishing the 100% renewable energy resolution. I was in my dorm and was really happy to see that that went through. Madison is now the largest school district to make that commitment, so really being a leader in that sense. And so throughout that campaign, we collected 3,000 signatures from people across the Madison community demonstrating support. So we have your backs. We're we're going to encourage you to move forward with a referendum, and there's a ton of community support behind renewable energy, energy efficiency, as well as the referendum in general. So continue the work that you're doing, and thank you so much.
Thank you. Michael Huey?
Thanks. I'm Mike Huey. Kind of had some thoughts prepared, but I think I'll go a different route after kind of hearing what's going on here. I'm a Madison West parent, and also speaking in respect to the 2020 referendum. I'm also a baseball coach at Madison West. We've had a lot of, I guess, athletic director turnover. That's probably well documented here. And I've had now my third child go through Madison West, and the place is a great place. The culture is amazing. The ability to have this kind of melting pot of people in the same place and interacting, and the acceptance and tolerance and kind of variety of things that go on there, I've been really exceptionally pleased with. Kind of experiencing this as the coach and seeing, or actually as a parent, and then secondly as a coach, the issue with athletic facilities and facilities that potentially could make this more of a community fixture is really absolutely necessary. I mean, the ability for us to kind of do our jobs as coaches is extremely, I guess, just to say it's extremely difficult is not enough. It almost becomes unmanageable. You have players going different ways. We're practicing off-site. What do we do if it rains or if there's some other, issue? We have kids running all over the place in their own cars. I live 4 blocks from the school, and with no ability for kids to stay on campus, I can tell you that crime activity is picked up in my neighborhood. Kids are running around at lunchtime in between classes. Some of that is much better since the attendance initiative. But after school, it looks different than a lot of places. And it is necessary to have the ability to keep these kids on campus. I think one of the reasons that we don't retain in sports where people don't have resources is because we can't keep them on campus. And that is, to me, the biggest issue. I always say that, my kids, they live close to school. They have, parents who are home, and it's difficult to keep them in line and to give them opportunity and to give opportunity kind of broadly in a place where there's 2,400 students. A field house, I think, is necessary if that's something that will keep our kids playing and not in trouble. And it will certainly give us at least some competitive equity. But that's the bigger issue to me, is to keep kids playing, and to keep kids playing and doing things that are worthwhile and not the alternative, because a community fixture is what this should be. You know, I don't understand all the, you know, kind of pool dimensions and things like that, but our pool doesn't work, clearly. So that's kind of what I'm here to say, and that's my perspective, so I appreciate it.
Thank you. Perfect timing. That marks the end of our public appearances for tonight. So I don't know, Kelly, if you want to come up. I was just going to caveat maybe our discussion tonight. We're going to do it in 3 parts, just in terms of stoppages. The first point we'll pause is Kelly's going to walk us through some of the questions on the state budget. So we'll pause to discuss any questions on that. The second pause will be around some of the strategic equity investments that we've been discussing. And then the last will be on amendments. So we'll try to run this in 3 sections. And the second one is the strategic equity investment. So that's we've had that discussion a couple of times already. Maybe just the last thing I'll say, the amendment conversation we're going to try to have in a little bit of a delicate way. We haven't historically had an amendment that ties bargaining with an amendment, and one of the 7 of us has to recuse from the bargaining discussion. So we are trying to separate those so that everybody can participate. And I think, Kelly, you're going to say a little bit more about kind of how we're going to hope to try to manage that. But basically, we're going to try to talk about the takes part of the amendment without talking about the base wage bargaining component. So we should not walk out of here with an agreement on that. That will be done in closed session, which we will all have an opportunity to participate. So I just wanted to try to kind of caveat. Kelly will probably do it better than me, but I just wanted to at least say that out loud in some of the reasoning. So I don't know, Jen, if you have any.
Is it all right if I say a few things before passing over to Kelly? Hi, everybody. Good to see you. This is the staff's kind of last stop before delivering to you the final preliminary budget proposal at the end of this month. So this is a really big deal for us. This is our last chance to get input from the board, which will lead into making that final round of adjustments before you vote on the preliminary budget in June. So just a reminder of process. Kind of maybe a cautionary note for everyone. Often at this last stop, there can be an impulse to how do I put this, to kind of invent crises. I want to remind everyone that we have a very strong budget. We are not in a budget crisis. So let's not treat it as such. We do have competing commitments, though. And you could hear that in the public testimony tonight, right, where we heard about concerns regarding compensation, potential strategic framework, priority-related budget investments, and thoughts on facilities, right, which is part of our budget deliberations too, right? Some of those kind of basic investments that we have to take care of every year. So that's what makes budgeting always hard, right? Or the inherent competing commitments, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. I think that's all I'll say. We just want you to know that we're going to be listening carefully and closely, because what we take away from this meeting will flow into adjustments. Whatever we don't adjust in the budget, of course, everything is open to an actual amendment on the stage in June. But if there's anything we can build in at this point on the front end before we deliver that final proposal to you, we want to be able to do that. So I'll pass up to Kelly and Lisa, and let's walk through it.
All right, thanks, Jen. So Jen just went through our objectives for tonight. Thank you for having us. June Operation Work Group, which is our last operation work group before the board would vote on June 24th on our preliminary budget. after June 24th, we do have this period between July and September where the budget is a little less in front of the board, but that doesn't mean my team's not doing a lot of work. We're actually closing the books and re-reconciling the year. We're also analyzing everything that comes out of the federal and the state budget numbers. So there's a lot of work that happens between July and September, which allows us to come back together in October to re-look at assumptions and finalize decisions before the end of October, where you pass the budget and certify the levy.
Which remind me of my final comment that I wanted to make. Thank you, Kelly. I want to make sure that tonight, as we have this discussion, because we're not going to be going into a big conversation about compensation, I do not want that to signal a lack of desire to do all we can on compensation. That has always been the plan. We want to be able to have the state's budget so we can do as much as possible and the best as possible for everyone, our staff and our students.
Yeah, so that's kind of a good segue into our revenue update. So I'll go through these next slides pretty quick. We all know that we have budget goals that we agreed to back in January and guiding principles for our budget process. We always like to put those in the room at the forefront of our conversations, just as a reminder, because the budget process is a long process. We also put our approach into the room to kind of remind you where we are. We go through our budgeting approach 3 times, in our January through March phase, and our May and June phase to reconfirm our assumptions, and then again July through September to reconfirm after state numbers going in. So we're just closing out that second phase, and then in July we start moving into the third phase of work. So our revenue forecast update is on the slide in front of you. The budget process could still be a long way for the state to go. They are literally meeting every day and have hearings ongoing as we speak. The Joint Finance Committee is kind of a stepping stone for the budget process. What we know came out of that committee is that they moved forward a proposal for $200 per pupil in overall revenue. They get there, that's $2.7 million, which could be potential unbudgeted revenue authority. They get there in 2 separate formulas, which can be a bit complicated, but essentially the first one allows us to put $175 per pupil, or about $2 million, on our tax levy. So by increasing the revenue limit, if we were to receive this authority and if the board were to choose to use it all, ultimately that would move our levy from about 6.2% up to about 7%. In addition to that, the Joint Finance Committee moved forward $25 in categorical per pupil aid. This is direct funding from the state, so it would not go on the levy if this is what were to be in the final budget proposal. In addition to that, we did see the Joint Finance Committee move a 0.7 special education categorical aid forward. Now, this aid is a reimbursement aid. So for any qualified special education support, FTE, that we provide to our students, we get a reimbursement. It was about 25.3%, and now we're looking at 26%. So just a small increase. That actual reimbursement is on actual spend. So if you see any numbers higher than the number projected up on our screen right now, the Joint Finance Committee puts out estimates kind of as a political maneuver to show the investments that they might be putting into the budget. Ultimately, the best numbers that they have to use are the budget that the board approved back in October. When we run our estimates, we use actuals. We look at our current expenditure to date. We project through the end of the year. It could be a range anywhere, in that area, but that's our estimate at this point. The statewide mental health investments is something that we're seeing coming out of the Joint Finance Committee, and that we're hopeful stays in the budget and maybe even potentially grows. We might see a little bit on that mental health support going forward, which would be great news for our investments. And unfortunately, at this point, we haven't heard a lot of mentioning on any increases to the bilingual and bicultural aid. We'll continue to watch that, but that was a bit of a disappointing news coming out of the Joint Finance Committee. The state still has their budget vote kind of scheduled for June 30th. We're hopeful that that's when we'll see our budget, and we'll continue to watch it and move forward and keep the board updated.
So I just want to clarify the potential increase to special education. The $120,000, based on the email you sent earlier today, is a pretty conservative estimate, and it's a possible range from 120,000 to like 443,000. Okay, I just want to make sure that's clear and that's out there.
Yep, the highest end, the 443, would be the Joint Finance Committee's analysis if we were to spend every single dollar that was put in the budget in October. What we know is that as the year goes on, we get vacancies, and those vacancies might remain open for a short period of time to a long period of time. It is hard to hire in the middle of the year. And so more often than not, our actuals do not match the budget at the end of the year, and the actuals are slightly lower. So what we're using is actuals when we make that assumption. So the 443, I would say, is highly unlikely that it's that high.
And this may sound like a stupid question, but before we're talking about possibilities, now we're talking about actual numbers. Are we going to try and use the actuals for everything, or are we going to still go, is it the prediction of the actual number or the actual number that we actually have? If that made sense. Basically, to say this is the...
So okay, the difference here is that this is a reimbursable aid. Any aid that is in the budget that is reimbursable, this is not our only reimbursable aid, but any aid that's reimbursable, we use actuals because it's only reimbursed on actuals. Is that
That's
helpful?
where I was
Okay.
kept getting lost
Yeah.
in the number. Appreciate that.
Yeah, good question.
A couple questions. Can you talk a little bit more about the grant increase for statewide mental health, and also do we see or do we foresee a need, or what is the foreseeable need for more bilingual, multilingual aid?
Let Lisa help me with bilingual aid. On the mental health grant, the Joint Finance Committee moved forward $3 million in new spending across the whole state for mental health. That's not a lot for the whole state. So we're not making any large projections that a lot of this is going to go our way. I'm sure some will. But we're probably not looking at, hundreds of thousands of dollars increase when that $3 million needs to go across the whole state. They've not released a lot of information regarding the new grant funding, how it's going to be allocated. So we're hopeful we'll get something, but there's just not enough to really tie anything to yet. But by October, perhaps there will be.
Can you talk a little bit about like which grants do we go after and which we don't? As this just a boiler or generalization?
Yeah.
Because I know we don't go for every grant.
We don't. We have a small team, someone from Lisa's team and someone from my team that typically work together, actually two people from my team, that work together to identify all the grants that are available and our likelihood of receiving them. We only have one grant writer, and so we gotta kind of pick and she's very good, but we gotta pick and choose what she's writing and what's the highest leverage use of her time. So kind of as a small team, we have Lisa and I meet every other week, and we go through their recommendations and ultimately tell our staff what we think is the best use of their time. And if there's conflicts within a grant about what we're writing about, between team members, Lisa and I kind of work that through and make those decisions too. You want to?
Thank you. Bilingual bicultural. Yeah, I'm happy to give it a try. So our bilingual bicultural budget funds our bilingual resource teachers in the district, and those folks are allocated on sort of a formula basis. So more bilingual bicultural would, of course, lower that formula so that quote-unquote caseloads for bilingual resource teachers would go down in our schools moving forward. That's how that aid would support programming for the schools.
Can you just talk a little bit about the difference between the bilingual bicultural load versus English only load? Is there much discrepancy?
So let me get this right, and I can get you actuals then, Ananda. I want to say that the ratio for bilingual resource teachers is 1 to 45 in the English classrooms. In a dual language classroom, the ratio is 1 to 75, and that's because the teacher is already bilingual. So those ratios, if more funding was secured, could likely be adjusted. Does that help, Ananda?
Yeah.
Okay.
But the theme of the question was more, given we were just looked at like our enrollment increase, so there would potentially be a larger number of Latinx. We know we also have just overall an increased number of refugees and English learners. Like,
No, we have not, no.
I'm like surprised because that is a theme
Right,
across the
right,
state.
right.
So, okay, thank you.
I guess I just wanted to kind of reiterate or call attention to the first couple bullets here. I mean, we had budgeted around $100 a pupil from the state with a hope that we would get to 200 and increased revenue authority. And this gets us to $200, but 75 of that is not coming from the state. It's coming from Madison taxpayers. And I just want to say that out loud, and you just call kind of our attention to it in that it directly impacts the increase in our tax levy and in a somewhat material way. So I just want to make sure everybody's kind of clear on the revenue sources there, that part of this increase, 75% of the increase is coming from Madison local taxes instead of from state. So I just wanted to.
No, that's correct. So $100 of the per pupil is already budgeted for. It's already in the draft budget. The $2.7 million would be the additional going from $100 per pupil, which was our assumption, up to the $200 that the Joint Finance Committee moved forward.
Any other questions on funding, state budget, ongoing discussion there before we keep going? Yeah, no. All right, take it away.
All right, so the month of May was our kind of feedback theme for the month. We spent a number of targeted feedback sessions, a larger community feedback session, and kind of the online feedback survey tool that we've done in the years past, but with some changes to the survey itself. And this particular slide is the themes across all of them that really stood out in every venue. So for the strategic equity projects in general, they were all supported. But there were certain investments that stood out more than others. So the mental health programs, by and large, no matter which group you talk to, rose to one of the highest leverage items. The Black Excellence Community Coalition Fund, all the groups spent a good amount of time kind of talking about that. The BET professional development, particularly the restorative justice training, came to kind of the higher level of investments, and then everyone seemed a little excited about the microschool concept coming back for next year. On the staffing side, particularly in the rooms where you had staff giving feedback, a lot of support for our investments in the student services and the special education FTE in particular. Areas that were not in my budget presentation as a highlight or focus that came up in each of the groups were training for SEAs and ensuring that any position that we might hire had a diversity hiring focus. That was a theme that could not be missed. In addition to that, there was a lot of questions around implementation plans and a lot of stress on making sure that we implement anything in the strategic equity projects with a keen eye to making sure they were supporting those who they were intended to support. For the teachers of color group, those themes carried out. Because they're kind of more educated in the budget process already, there was support for the weighted formula pilot in special education that we are trying out on the Memorial. There was a request not only for more Fund 10 money, like we heard from the community, or more Black Excellence funding, but specifically tying it to Fund 10, similar to what we heard from the Black Excellence Community Coalition. There was support for the additional FTE in the FACE department, but a very specific conversation tied to hopes that that was just a stepping stone, hopefully tied to an equity department that was well-funded and well-supported in their particular viewpoint. As far as what might be missing, they did focus on the training on the SEAs, and they wanted to make sure when it comes to implementation of restorative justice that we really thought about what kind of time it takes to do restorative justice well from a teacher perspective in a classroom. They thought so long as training was important and we need to do that, but in and of itself, it's not enough. We need to look at the structures of the day so that teachers have the ability to actually do the restorative justice that they want to do. And that was a big part of that conversation. I've already talked with you about the Black Excellence Community Coalition feedback, but I wanted to make sure it wasn't missed by the fact that we talked about it a little bit in May. So I mentioned then, and I'll mention again now, that diversity hiring was a key piece of that theme, as was investing more in the Black Excellence Community Coalition Fund. They also talked about parent liaisons. wondering what the district might be doing about parent liaisons moving forward. That particular role was one that they felt was very high leverage for the district. And then some of the parents wanted to talk more about some of the fights in secondary and the climate and culture in secondary in particular. The community feedback session, there was a good showing of staff and parents in general, also students. And the parents, staff, and students all had kind of differing viewpoints. Parents just had questions in general around our compensation and benefit models, and probably could have spent an entire hour just talking about that. Staff were, of course, advocating for more base wage and more staff in our schools. The parents who were there with special education needs were also advocating to, in support of the investments in CC teachers and SEAs, but also advocating for more. On the strategic equity projects, again, overwhelming support for mental health. And some kind of questions around the advanced learning and the Black Excellence Community Coalition Fund, wondering more about the implementation and how specifically that would work to ensure we got the outcomes we were looking for. That group also was wondering about AVID and where the district was headed with our AVID investments. We did do a significant investment just a couple years ago, but have been stable since then. They were looking for some more arts in the budget, and we're wondering where the district's arts agenda was. And SEA training came up here as well. The students brought up culturally relevant curriculum, and I explained to them the work that we're doing, but it was high on their radar, something they were looking for and was important to them. On the online feedback, we had about 46% were staff members, and then the next 40% were a combination of parents and staff, or just parents or community members. They were advocating, the staff in particular were advocating for the base wage increases. When you look at the overall responses, about 50% were advocating for base wage increases, and the other 50% were feeling like it was about in the right range. When it came to feedback on the staff, again, supportive of student services and lower class sizes did come up in the feedback there as well. And then the same themes for the strategic equity projects played out as we saw in the focus groups. So when we met in May, there was one open item that is not on our amendments today, and that was regarding the Black Excellence Community Coalition Fund. We heard from the board and had already started to hear back from our feedback sessions a request for Fund 10 investments into the Black Excellence Coalition Fund to make sure that they had some of the flexibility that they were looking for. So between May and today, my team has gone back to the budget and looked to scrub to find an additional $100,000 is where we were able to get to increase the Community Coalition Fund for a total of $350,000, $100,000 being Fund 10 money. So Kate, I can stop here before we move
I
on.
think if we take some just guidance on this is the last open item from the equity investments we've been discussing for the last couple of months, and then we can dive into the amendments. Thank you.
Just two questions. One, on these group meetings, which I thank you for doing, were they advertised? Did we select who went? How did we do that?
The community meeting was advertised in the parent and staff newsletter, and we use, the meeting was at the Goodman Center, which is where we often have such meetings. And so I did use kind of Mike Hernandez and his direct links and contacts to make sure that we, got people there. So we did the broad approach and we did a targeted approach. And much credit to Mike Hernandez. He was pulling kids off the basketball court to come in and give us feedback. And they were an awesome group of kids. Chris was there. She could probably agree. The kids were amazing. So it was a good group.
One other question, did we ever, I know, I'm thrilled with Black Excellence, I'm thrilled with meeting with teachers of color and all that. Did we meet with I know there is a special ed group, and its name is escaping me. It's not an ad hoc committee, but it's a special ed committee, I think.
Madison Partners for Inclusive Education, is that what you're thinking of?
I couldn't think of the name for the life of me, so I appreciate the assist. Did we try and reach out to them at all?
Yeah, so Nikki, when we built the communication plan, which I shared with the board in April, the intent was to specifically target focus groups of groups of individuals that are less heard by the board, and their voice is often less heard through the budget process. So it was an intentional kind of focus group, and then we held the community kind of meeting as a way of getting broader support as well.
I would just add that MPI, as well as John Harper's kind of in-district committee, have been certainly consulted on the budget overall. They were consulted, I think, probably multiple times on the adjustments that we've made to staffing for special ed, just so you know. I mean, they've certainly touched the budget process over time.
Gloria?
Yeah, I have, I'm really in support of advanced learning and equity and how do we prepare our Black students for advanced learning. I'm glad you had that conversation and that discussion with the coalition, but I'm just wondering if there was any discussion or feedback on how do we prepare our students for advanced learning, so to increase, right, participation in advanced learning. Advanced learning is really known as a white student, right? That is majority of our white students going to advanced learning. And I really see that as an equity issue. And I really want us to start looking at our students as, really just seeing them and preparing them to improve, right? And so I'm just wondering if that was discussed. I see that they actually were just hesitant about whether this would benefit students of color, and I could see why they would.
So I'll let Lisa answer the question from what the instructional vision would say. From the community, for the focus groups feedback, kind of just adding FTE felt like something that was very easily turned into a universal strategy versus feeling like a targeted strategy in their minds. The students in particular probably had the most to say at the community meeting. And they were feeling like it had more to do with, the supports they receive in the classroom. And so what does that look like for me in a classroom? They were very excited to hear that the curriculum itself was being kind of rewritten and analyzed at the advanced learning kind of level for them. That was something that was important. But they were feeling like so long as I'm the only person in a room and there's no additional supports, I'm probably not going to push myself or, take that kind of a risk. So that was the conversation that ensued, not that they had, yeah.
I would say from an instructional standpoint, I appreciate the question. The job descriptions and the thinking behind the advanced learning FTE was a heavy emphasis on talent development and trying this out in some schools that had greater populations of African American students. And then at the high school level, the thinking there was that there would be greater coordination and greater sort of wraparound for students so that they could actually sit in honors, earned honors, or standalone honors or AP classes and better coordinate student access to those and student support in those classrooms.
Okay.
So I was at the public input session, as Kelly mentioned, and I agree with what you guys said about advanced learning. I think we heard loud and clear from the students that they want more happening in the classroom and with wraparound support to help more students of color access advanced learning, and yet we're looking at investing in teacher leaders who would be more working with teachers and not directly with students. So I don't think we were hearing that they don't want investments in advanced learning. I think we were hearing that they possibly want different investments in advanced learning than what we're putting out there. So I want to make sure that's clear because we haven't invested in advanced learning for a while, and I think we need to take those investments seriously, especially if we're looking at equity. Another thing I heard clearly at the community input session, and I floated around between teacher and parent tables, was interest in giving our staff a full cost of living adjustment. And finally, I just wanted to talk briefly about the Black Excellence Community Coalition Fund, which I'm fully in support of. I think we need to put some money behind supporting this group. However, I think we also, as a board, need to do some work on how that process happens. Like, we have really clear processes for community partnerships, for charter schools, for approving things where we're investing money in something where people are going to possibly be given a fair amount of leeway to use that money in a way that's innovative and interesting. And I want to make sure that we're going to have similar, transparent processes for allocating the money in this fund so that then we can know confidently that we can just let people be innovative with it and do good things. So I just wanted to ask about that, ask if there, see if there's any clarification at this point about what that process might look like and how the board might be engaged.
The community Nichelle is here if we need to have a bigger discussion on that, but the community coalition is working on that. They're meeting on it now, and I'm sure in upcoming months we'll have more information, but we do want to make sure we give them the time and the space to be developing a thoughtful process that's very respectful of the community that we're all trying to serve.
Yeah, so I think moving back to the advanced learners conversation, I appreciate your comments, Chris and Gloria, but I think when we talk about equity and advanced learners, sorry, y'all, and we talk about talent development versus the ability to recognize students of color as advanced learners, I think we're already skewing the conversation in a way that frames it so that we're talking about building up the capacity of kids of color to participate in advanced learners versus recognizing that capacity already exists. And I want to acknowledge that continues to come up within this conversation. And so I think part of that recognition ability means surveying all 5 areas of advanced learners and investing in them. And that means the areas in which we have not invested strategically K through 12, which include leadership in the performing arts. The other area of emphasis I would love for you to speak to, Kelly, is how we're investing in the arts, because that's something I heard come up in terms of community comment. And that ties into advanced learners because the area of performing arts is one of the areas that we have historically not invested significantly. And so how does this budget reconcile that?
So I know that our high schools go through a process with students, and they identify what students want to enroll in. And part of our work this year around master scheduling was building a master schedule based on what student interest was versus just on what had historically always been offered. So that's actually a really clear outcome for our scheduling work this year, and it was a big shift for some of our schools. So I am hoping we're going to see different courses offered based on what kids are interested in. It's been a balance this year in schools, certainly, but the shift to student interest versus, how shall I say, sort of the same staffing plan was definitely different this year.
I'm having a hard time connecting the dots between that and what I just asked. And so I apologize, Lisa,
That's okay.
if I was hard to understand.
No, that's okay.
What I'm asking is within this budget, in terms of areas of advanced learners, and I'm speaking K through 12, right? So I think the emphasis around high school advanced learners is actually a little less relevant to me than elementary and middle school advanced learners. And the identification process, and also the 2 areas, because whether or not you're interested in math wouldn't dictate whether or not we were able to recognize that you were excelling at math and challenge you appropriately. And so if a student is interested in leadership, that's really beautiful. If a student is talented in the area of leadership, how are we supporting that talent?
I don't know that there are new investments in that area, Lisa. I mean, I think that, certainly, I can speak to personal experience to some extent. My son is, I think, truly gifted when it comes to art, and he gets like an extra dose of art instruction every week by the art teacher at his school, which is wonderful. That doesn't necessarily require an additional investment, right? There's the ways we work, right, and the ways we team and use flexible grouping time to actually meet the needs of children, right? That's not necessarily requiring more investment, but adjustments to our ways of working and our way that we recognize talent and true giftedness and respond accordingly. And then there are places where we actually need additional investment. I mean, when it comes to the arts generally, we've been a partner with the city and with the Overture Center on this huge project called Any Given Child for 5 years now. And the whole approach has been about expanding access to the arts K-8 with an eye towards building up better access to the areas that fall outside of visual arts and kind of the traditional music program that we have.
Yeah,
There's a lot more work to do there, right? Like I think theater, drama, I mean, there's so much more we can do. I just think that it's not in this budget.
Okay.
I think it's something that we should be thinking about for the future. That hasn't been where this board or in the past board has, and we have quite honestly been prioritizing in this particular budget. I think it's a great question. I just don't think it's there.
So I think how it ties to advanced learners then is we're talking about the difference between investment in greater resources versus accommodation using the resources we currently have.
Right.
I would love any information you all can get on what accommodation looks like. So who's being accommodated, who's getting extra time in the arts, and in areas of leadership, and how those accommodations are diverse, given the diversity of students who are accessing them, versus additional services. Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds good.
I'm going to jump in and maybe take your point as well, Ali. There's a couple of things that I just heard you say. One was, and I actually am hearing broad alignment in this group around kind of the Black Excellent Plan here, and maybe broad alignment as well that our AL investments are potentially not quite right yet. And that it's great we are making an additional investment in advanced learning. That's something that's been a long time coming. And that maybe there's a different way to think about some of those resources based on both community feedback as well as areas that we know we have gaps. Lisa, you and I have talked about arts and leadership in particular, as well as the other curricular areas as topics that maybe we could even potentially assign a person to take the lead on something more systematic. So that there is something in writing, Ali. I've asked this question, I've never gotten anything yet. So, I mean, it may be just a pushback to you guys in terms of if that's an area that we could task one of the pilots, one of the folks that were kind of shifting the role to include some curricular design or some systematization. That word's not quite right. So that it's clearer, particularly K through 8. I would second that the focus on secondary for me here feels not like the highest value addition. K through 8 for me feels like certainly the highest value addition we could make, and would wholeheartedly support that addition, focusing on building out more of a system for arts and leadership. So, Nikki and then Ananda.
I'm no expert in the arts, and I will openly admit it, but I was at one wonderful art show held by Briar Patch this weekend. Some of the best use of cartooning I've ever seen. There was a wonderful African-American artist that was interested in copywriting her work, actually. I did tell him that the Library of Congress can do it much cheaper than the online sites and that it's legal. Much better than some of the online sites, which may not be a legal copyright. So that was my tiny little contribution. Their talent was immense. And we really need to start recognizing that is talent, that is advanced learning. The girl is 13 years old. And she's got a business. And that needs to be recognized.
Ananda?
Thank you. I think I just wanted to bring back a theme around how we are recognizing talent, particularly around students of color and students with IP, and those are not mutually exclusive groups.
Exactly.
That came up in our conversation with our partners. It's coming up again, and like it's definitely not in the budget, and I don't know if we have had some like what is the extent that we have conversations about what are some of the best practices around really good ways in which have been proven to recognize those talents of students that are against the narrative of deficits. Right? I think that is the most important thing. I appreciate the conversation, the investment. I think those investments are important, but I don't see the systemic structure to support those investments.
So I was just going to make a comment. I wanted to respond, Ali, also to you and what you were saying. So we're actually making some changes within our organization to support a more integrated approach to arts programming and development and content area programming and development, because the arts can happen in reading, in math, in social studies, and in science. That integration piece and people working together differently. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be finalizing some changes in that area to focus more on humanities and the integration of the arts within that, and we'll have more information to share on that within the next couple of weeks with folks.
Can I just briefly, and then Chris, I mean, I appreciate that. It also feels like a universal strategy to me. We're talking about truly, like, your son is truly exceptional as an artist. I mean, I'm going to second
We've
you
all
as a
seen
parent.
it.
You're always a little, like, iffy, but he truly is.
Yes, thank you.
I mean, for truly exceptional artists and kids and young people with truly exceptional leadership skills, I'm not quite sure that arts integration is the same.
This is different.
Support
That
and
is a
challenge
strategy.
and that we're talking about.
Yeah, if I could
Totally
just
get that.
return to the
Yep.
actual proposal
Chris is
for,
reading it. Sorry.
yeah, oh, I'm so sorry, just to stay on this topic for a second longer. The proposal that Lisa and her team put forward is meant to think differently about how that role can be used to actually identify giftedness in all of its forms, and to think differently, right, about how to best to provide services. So, I mean, I do think that maybe it's secondary focused. I agree. Maybe that isn't quite right. Actually, it's two elementary and elementary and one secondary position, right? We would reformulate the role, try some things out, see if we produce different results before potentially expanding a different approach to identification and support district-wide. So I just want to remind everyone, I think the intent behind that pilot approach was meant to get at some of the things that we're discussing right now, but not through any specific program, but through a reformulation of how we use this really important investment, this position that currently exists in some way, shape, or form in every elementary and middle school in the district. Not necessarily enough, though.
This is changing the topic slightly, but before we move on to the amendments, I wanted to make sure that I hit on a couple of questions we've been hearing from the community and at tonight's comments. And the first one was, I want to clarify, is the West Pool going to get upgrades this summer to improve air quality and safety? Because that's a concern we've said as a board, and we've heard a lot from the community.
I can't answer the specifics on what West is getting this summer. I'll have to respond to you in a weekly update.
That's totally fine, but I would like to know if
The
that's
West
actually going to
Pool is
happen
in
this summer.
current plans for the long-range facility plan, as you all know. But as far as what's exactly happening at West this summer, I'd have to get back to you.
We've heard enough about dangerous air quality that I'd like to find out if there's actually going to be some work done to remediate that over the summer.
I also worry that tiles falling on someone's head.
And the second thing we've been hearing a fair amount about is class sizes and special education allocations, particularly from the Leopold and Lowell communities. And, we've been told everything is fine, and then we hear from the community that everything's not fine. And I'm just wondering if we can get more detailed information about the workbook allocations that were given to those schools, so just we know where we're at in terms of projected enrollment and staffing. People have made a good point that equitable staffing is not always the same as equal staffing, and these are high need, particularly Leopold is a high need school, and I want to make sure that their needs are being met given their large student population and the fact that they do have a lot of staff turnover every year.
I know we sent an update to particularly the Leopold allocation a couple of weeks ago. I can talk with Ricardo about getting that back out. And I know that he sent something out today about Lowell, about their allocations as well. And Ricardo and I were talking about those schools today, and it is, I actually called the Lowell principal today, and remember, those allocations for next year are based on January enrollment. That's really early. The January counts. And we know students come and go in schools, right? Our schools are mobile, and we will certainly make adjustments as student needs change moving forward. So I can go back, Chris, and take a look at what we sent to be sure all your concerns are addressed.
Okay, so are you guys good? I think, do you have feedback? Do you have clear feedback, I think, on the existing investments that we've discussed to build
so
into
I'm
the
hearing
next?
keep the $100,000 in for Black Excellence. You'll see that baked into the June budget. On the AL secondary position, I actually think that leads into the next conversation. So, I mean, I'm leaning towards possibly moving that out, but I think I'd like to get into the second part of the actual amendments, maybe to
I think
make
that's fair.
sure I'm hearing what I'm hearing. So on the slide in front of you are the board member amendments that you all submitted to us prior to these materials being posted. We've categorized them into 3 categories, and we'd like to address them as such. The first category being any investments, so adds to the budget that the board member would like to make. The second category being board member reductions of strategic equity projects. We'll take that on as kind of a high-level grouping. And then third, any board member reductions to overall central office and school budgets. If we go into this document right here, Barb, if you wouldn't mind helping pull that on up, I would recommend that we, that's not the right link. Barb, do you have the Excel spreadsheet?
I think we all have physical
We have the
copies.
physical copy.
We have the physical.
Everyone need one?
Yep.
Yes. Mary, do you have the copy?
I don't have it. There you go, Barb's pulling it up right now. Thanks, Barb.
I don't have it.
We got it up.
So the first investment that Nikki put forward was on the Simpson Street Free Press Amendment.
And I can explain it if you want, or if you want to go ahead.
So I'll just go ahead and give our overall analysis, Kate, and then Kate can kind of.
We're gonna stop, yeah, we're gonna pause at each so we can try to be logical.
So we fully analyzed the $30,000 request for Simpson Street Free Press. And as a team, what we're recommending is that we have a partnership process that all of our nonprofit and community partners in the entire city would go through to be funded by the school district. And what we want to do is we want to make sure it goes through that memorandum of agreement process, because that's where we sit down at the table and we align our goals and objectives to the district. We talk about what outcomes we're looking for together. And it really is a time where we coalesce about what work we're taking on together. And so to just kind of add $30,000 for the budget really takes out the key part of that process that ultimately usually leads to our outcomes. So our recommendation is that Simpson Street Free Press kind of start that process by filling out, taking the first step and filling out the partnership inquiry form. Our team will take it from there. And then any funding that's tied to the draft MOA will come forward to the board for October adjustments that could be made before the board votes in October.
If I may.
Yep, Nikki.
The reason I brought this amendment, and I may not have been cleared up, I see this as a 2-point issue. One, the 30,000 in funding, because they provide, one, an interesting approach to education. Two, because they have been successful both in reading and math and moving the needle, not just on MAP scores, but on actual learning. And they have a 100-person wait list, and I thought this could actually address that. I understand the partnership goals, and I think the partnership portion could be done. The reason why I would like the funding done at this point is because I don't want any interruptions. This is one of the few programs that we have stipends that are paid, kids that are actually doing the work, kids that are learning on the job. I've been there about three times Ben, correct me if I'm wrong. I think I've been there 2 times, maybe 3. I really enjoyed it, but what I enjoyed most is I'm seeing actual scholars learning. I'm actually seeing people sitting down with editors going, is this how this is phrased? How is this with dictionaries, with not just let's look it up on the internet. The internet was the last step, that it was written out first before it even touched a computer. And I thought that was really innovative. And I remember, Jen has said it a few times, no offense if I don't mind quoting you, but sometimes we do have to be bold on investments, and I think they've done a lot. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to separate the two, but I may not have phrased that well enough. If that's the case, I can always resubmit if that would make it clearer.
Ali is up.
Yeah, so I am a huge fan of Simpson Street Free Press and supporter of Simpson Street Press. Thank you all for being here. I struggle to understand how we would utilize the $30,000 to clear their wait list, given that the way this funding has been talked about, it seems like Gen Ops funding, and it seems like funding for the space they currently have. So it seems like funding to do what they're already doing, and that to me seems pretty complex. And I think anytime we give Gen Ops funding, it's almost kind of a merger in terms of like So I'm curious. I'm curious about how we would invest in Simpson Street, and what results we're expecting, and how this will inform our practices in terms of school newspapers and expand our ability to utilize Simpson Street as a model. And I think the amendment doesn't quite get at that, and also kind of the overall conversation we've had about Simpson Street hasn't really allowed for us to get at that. So I'm excited by your recommendation, and I look forward to hearing more.
Gloria?
So, do we have other organizations who bypass the process?
No. We, about 3 years ago, took like all of our organizations. Jess Hankey did it through this process using our high, medium, and low categories. So they've all been through this process in one way or another. The very low touch has gone through the process, but hasn't necessarily gone to the board because it's, beneath the board thresholds and things. So we have smaller, but most of them have gone through the MOA process. And truly, it's been very helpful to create joint goals and joint outcomes. And we've seen programs approve, and we've also been able to have hard conversations for areas that we've not necessarily met our joint goals and outcomes, and it's helped support the continuous improvement process.
Yeah, I'm really I'm really in support of Simpson Street Free Press. I mean, I think they are doing some excellent work. But I'm also about process, and we have a lot of organizations who are doing good work. And I'm just concerned about where we put ourselves in when we just automatically do this. I think there is a process. I think we need to keep the fidelity of that process. Continue to support Simpson Street Free Press. We don't fund them currently.
Correct.
I mean that is amazing to me. I think that doing an MOA, I think that is, I support the $30,000, getting the information of what the funds would be used for, because they do some great work, but having them go through a process just like everybody else does.
Ananda?
Sorry, Mr. White. Yeah. And
It always happens.
it was good that I was reminded to turn the mic. Apparently there's been some history on the reason why the form wasn't filled out, or why this partnership has not been fulfilled, or whatever it was. I really appreciate the process. I also appreciate how the process has helped the district identify the partnerships and kind of give them a sense of like what are our partnerships and what are the levels of the partnerships. I also think that it's important that there are the consider things that are, you know, perhaps not part of that process for whatever that reason is. And maybe there's been some miscommunication in the past, or otherwise. So I'm trying to, like, you know, kind of address the elephant in the room without bringing the entire elephant. But to say that, you know, I think we have seen over and over again the value that they bring to our students and to our families. And, you know, I'm open to supporting this amendment. I'm also open to hear from the district another creative way that is not through the partnership. That's where I'm at. Thanks.
So I want to build off what Ananda said. Has Simpson Street Free Press applied for partnerships in the past?
They had not filled out the form.
If this were to be a partnership, would it be high, medium, or low intensity?
Most likely low, but it all depends on, I mean, this is the goals themselves, how many students we're looking to approach, how many schools that they're in. When the rubric was created, as far as regarding high, medium, and low, there's a number of things to consider, and that's part of what we want to talk about. How many schools are we talking about? How many kids are we talking about? How many, in addition to what we currently have served, can we serve? And those are the conversations we want to have, but we need Simpson Street Free Press to kind of come to the table. And I think right now, you know, they're waiting to hear if they're going to get this funding via you all, and if they're not, then we have our avenue to work through the partnership policy.
So I support this amendment. I think Simpson Street Free Press brings a great deal of value to our district and to our community. I also support the process. I support having people come forward. Sometimes you have to change how your process works. You know, you have to be flexible sometimes, and this may be an instance where some flexibility is called for, and that flexibility might involve, like, maybe approving some funds for Simpson Street for Free Press with the contingency that maybe we'll run it through the rubric and see where the dice fall. But I feel that we as a board should vote on perhaps devoting some resources to the value that Simpson Street Free Press brings to all the kids in our district. They do us a great service.
I'm going to jump in before we start on second rounds, because this is the smallest value amendment on the page, and we've got a fair number to get through. Is this an emergency? Does the facility shut if we don't fund it?
This is not in my purview to answer.
Simpson Street has not made the proposal, right?
Okay.
I can answer.
Okay, so can we just quickly get guidance on, do we want to continue to have this on the amendment docket that we would vote on, I guess, you know, at the budget meeting in June? Or do we want to move it off of the amendment at this point and have it go through the funding or the partnership process? Those are the two paths here.
I heard Ananda, I heard Chris, and I heard me, but I don't know on anyone else.
I'm recommending the MOA, and I have similar questions about, is this an annual amendment, Nikki? Are we talking about $30,000 a year? Is it one shot? And then what is the financial health of the organization?
I had planned this as a one shot until we could form a partnership, at which point we would review.
Okay, can I propose that we kind of table this discussion, and if you want to bring it back to the floor as a part of the budget? Do people, I mean, we can keep talking about it, I just want to make sure it's 6:45 and we have some very material to go through.
Here's my problem with that, and I respect my board and everything. I just think that if we have 3 people who are interested, it's not the majority, and I understand it, I just think it should at least be heard.
Absolutely, and you're absolutely welcome to bring it as an amendment at that point in time.
I just think it needs to be on the agenda legally, so I think that would be a good idea, as long as it's on the agenda.
Let me take one step back on process, because that's a really good question, Nikki, and I should have addressed it in my opening comments. The process here is for us to determine if we're going to build something into the budget. And if I don't build it into the budget, meaning it's not in the budget book in front of you, any board member has the opportunity to put amendment forward, and it'll be voted on. I then have to find the funding to make that available. So that's the process. I will also be attaching kind of this budget amendment document to the final materials for the June 24th meeting as a way of a point of reference.
Cool. Okay, so let's move forward to the strategic equity project.
Barb, can you scroll down to the next amendment, please? So the next group of amendments is regarding the strategic framework equity projects. And those are, were put forward by Chris. The idea here is that we would reduce our investments around the strategic equity projects in order to allow investments in other areas of the budget. This is this is one of the areas Kate was referring to earlier. Any reductions in the budget for what's already baked in at this point that you all kind of direct us to make would go into a reserve fund that the board on June 24th could either direct us to invest in something else, or we hold in reserve until we get our state budget, and then the board would make the next level of decisions on how we use that reserve based on when we have all the moving parts in the budget. So any questions on that? So if, as we go into this reduction conversation, any reductions we're kind of directed to make, or that we are sensing that the full board wants to make, goes into a reserve. That reserve can either be used in the June 24th meeting or held until we get the full state budget.
Maybe, I'm going to try it just a little more directly, which was the spirit of these amendments, just kind of to honor, Chris, where you were coming from, is around staff compensation. And we're not going to go to that part of the discussion now. We will in our closed session, as well as at the kind of next formal process that Kelly's talking about.
Okay. So on the strategic equity project reductions, Chris did put forward some potential changes to the spreadsheet that's posted with these materials. And that recommendation is a total of $384,000 reduction in the strategic equity projects, including reducing one position to the advanced learning, eliminating the feeder pattern social worker position in the strategic equity projects, delaying, and Chris might need to confirm for us what that means, a 1.0 LEAP FTE, and delaying 50% of the new investments in the BEP professional development. So that would be a reduction of $100,000. So that's the amendment on the table for the board to discuss. From our perspective, what I will say is the strategic equity projects themselves are something that we do stand behind as, you know, kind of high leverage investments. That's the reason we put them forward to you. And if the board is feeling the need to make reductions for other investments at this period of time, it would be our recommendation that you look at new investments that have not yet been made versus making reductions to current items in the budget that schools and departments are relying on and already planning on for next school year. So there is an order of priority preference that I wanted to make sure I shared.
So before clarifying this, I would actually like to ask a process question, and I'm wondering if Matt can help out with it. So my process question is, right now we're being told we can only talk about reductions and we can't talk about why we're making them, because it would be, I don't understand the legalities of it, but it's not okay because of collective bargaining. I would like a clarification of what that means, because right now there is no closed session on the calendar between now and when we vote on June 24th. And if we have to vote on this amendment on June 24th without actually saying what this amendment is for, we're essentially silencing the voices of all of our staff, especially all of our staff who've reached out to us and written to us. And I think that's unfair to them. So I would like a clarification as to why we could talk about putting 0.5% cost of living adjustment into the base budget a few months ago, but now we can't talk about any additional percentage in the budget right now, legally. Can you help with that?
So I think the amendments that you're making would result in a reserve of funds. And then it would be up to the board to determine how they use those funds, is my understanding. And so right now, you are making amendments in order to develop that reserve, and at some later point in time, based upon negotiations with MTI and the other units, that reserve could be used, but it would ultimately be the full board's decision to determine how that reserve is used. Does that make sense?
No. Does the board have the legal authority to allocate money to a cost of living adjustment for our staff outside of the collective bargaining process? Do we have the legal authority to do that?
Yes.
Can we just say, as a board, we are allocating, we've done that in the past. We've just built it into the budget and we've paid our staff the full cost of living adjustment. And that's essentially what these amendments are getting at. Let's just build it into the budget and pay people. Can we do that right now? Does this have to become an unnamed reserve as opposed to amendments to pay our staff?
Can I make a clarifying?
Sure.
So the point of today's meeting is to decide if there's a reserve. That's today's meeting. That's what I'm hearing Kate say. Matt, correct me. I don't think there's anything that precludes a board member from making an amendment with said reserve on June 24th. I don't think there's anything to preclude that. It's just that, like that wouldn't have been a discussion that's happened with the board in its whole, so that June 24th meeting, that's the way it would look, and one board member could not vote on that particular amendment.
Yeah, I mean, because maybe part of the reason to separate these was partly we typically have bargaining discussions in closed session very narrowly without talking about kind of the other part of this, and the other was so that Ali could participate, honestly. So that,
Can I ask this question?
So that's not a legal answer at all, but that was
And I
part
guess
of the intention.
I don't think what you're suggesting, Chris, would be illegal. It wouldn't necessarily be collective bargaining.
It isn't collective.
Right, because
the other party's not at the table.
And I just, I'm concerned about that precedent because taken to the extreme, the board could go the other way. Now, I understand your desire to have a reserve to use for base wage increases, but then the opposite would be that we could have, without collective bargaining, this board could make a decision in the reverse way, where it would be a reduction. So I think we want to preserve our collective bargaining to collective bargaining. This isn't collective bargaining.
I think the main objective here is to make sure that everyone can participate in this discussion.
I just have.
That's the main objective about trying to separate those two items.
That was the main objective, and to
yeah.
retain a process that seems historically relevant.
Legal process question, if I may. Matt, I'm going to need you for that. One, I do, separate to the legal process, I do support the amendment. But two, I want everyone to participate. I'm just wondering if that, on the non-participation separation, I don't really see that as affecting the collective bargaining. I think that's preparing for the future. But my question is, and this is of no offense to anyone on this board, but my question is, when Anna and TJ were on this board, they were told they weren't allowed to sit at the table. They were told they weren't allowed to listen to the amendment. So why are we changing the process now? What's changed legally?
I wasn't on the board at that time. I was on general counsel for the board. I'd have to go back and review those.
Could you please? That would be huge.
Yeah.
Because I just want to know legally, because if we're going to follow precedent, I would like to know where it is, and it means no offense to anyone. I just legally want to know.
I will say, if this is a conversation that folks are ready to have at this moment, I am happy to excuse myself.
I don't want to make you excuse yourself if it's not necessary. That's why I'm trying to find out.
It is a conflict of interest. So if we are going to discuss a wage increase, then it is a conflict of interest, and we should treat it as such.
Can I make a suggestion? Can we just try to have this discussion? I think everybody's clear on the intent behind these, and everybody in the room is clear. Can we try to have a discussion on how we might fund a reserve that would potentially at some point be used for wages, and see if we can stay within the bounds for everyone to participate? And not, if that doesn't work, then we'll change. We'll just try. Okay.
Yeah. Kelly, you just said something that I'm interested in. I mean, I think, for me, it's a challenge for me to take away the equity work that we've been doing. So that's where I'm at. And you mentioned there's some priority items, like you would, you have some areas in which we should, that you would recommend. I'm just wondering if you could send that to us. on.
So I have no recommendations.
Okay.
From the administrative perspective, we have no recommendations on cuts to our strategic equity projects.
No, yeah.
And we don't have any recommendations on the cuts to our school-based and our department-based supports. I have personally scrubbed every single line of this budget for the last 6 years and twice this year. So there's no recommendations here. I'm just saying, if the board is going into cutting mode of this budget at this time in the stage, I would recommend you look at new investments.
That's right.
Rather than ongoing.
That's
That's all.
So you're not taking away.
That's what I
You're
heard.
only
Yeah.
not starting work that you had hoped to
Right.
start. And that's why the list of 4 things that are on this administrative analysis are here.
Gotcha.
Yeah, Kelly, that's exactly what I'm trying to clarify. Because I am in support of the amendment, but I don't understand really well, and I'm okay with not understanding fully, like, the separation. But if the essence is that we are trying to build a reserve to leave room for cost of living increase, I think there's some language in some of the amendments that Chris passed around holding, and I think that's maybe why we said hold it, which means that, like, I'm in support of what administration had proposed, but given that we don't have a finalized collective bargain and agreement, I don't feel fully confident to move to starting new projects. Is that?
Yeah, and
Is
I
that
would
kind
just
of what
add, Ananda, I mean, if you look at the 4 things that would be considered new, this is based on our analysis. The advanced learning specialists, the additional mental health and special ed supports, the 1 LEAP FTE specifically, the feeder pattern, social worker. I think what's just important to know is holding on those things essentially means you're not moving forward with it next year, because they're mainly about hiring people. And waiting until the October budget to posting positions, hiring, we just know. I'm looking at Quinn, he's been through this before. You don't get the position filled. So it's, I just want us to be real about it. It's okay I just don't want us to misrepresent what's really going on, because we're really probably not going to be filling those positions if we hold. And that's okay. It's just the choice we make.
So I'd like to clarify why I chose these 4 strategic equity items. So the first one, the advanced learning non-union professionals, not the teacher leaders who would be working K-8 presumably. It's the coordinator at the high school level. And my understanding was part of what that coordinator would be doing is picking up some of the work of equal opportunity schools. And equal opportunity schools will still be here next year. So I think we can afford to possibly delay that role and also possibly clarify and define that role better. If that person's going to be doing some really innovative stuff around advanced learning, let's take a year to really figure out where they can have the most impact before we make that investment, knowing we have equal opportunity schools to continue to work towards greater equity and greater diversity in our AP classes in our high schools. The feeder pattern social worker is, it's a nice idea, but I would rather pay our staff. The LEAP FTE was in the list of, like, dream items. Like, if we have enough money, maybe we'll do this. And my thinking is, if we have enough money, maybe we do this. But we wait until we see what we get from the state before deciding on it. Because, again, I think paying our staff in our schools is more important. And the BEP investments, that's not something where we have to hire a staff person. That's something where we can prioritize what we're doing for professional development. My feeling is the BEP is probably the most important professional development we're doing next year. So why don't we look at our whole pool of money for professional development and look at prioritizing the BEP PD in that pool of money and maybe cutting back on something else. Our staff are complaining about initiative fatigue. Maybe just focusing on the BEP for PD and not on other stuff is the way to go, as opposed to allocating more money on top of our existing pool of PD money for professional development. Let's just focus the resources we have on the BEP, because I agree that's really important. But I don't, and if we have enough money in the state budget, we can add that money back in, and if we don't, we don't. But that's my feeling on those items, and that's why I chose them.
I'll leave us.
So I just want to be responsive to the fact that we're going back and forth here a little, and that I think looking at the amendments separate from the context of staff funding is complex, given kind of the framework of the way the the amendments are being proposed. That being said, speaking very specifically to advanced learners at the secondary level, I think it's an area that we have not invested in for a long time. And I think that recreating this year in terms of the behavior education plan or in terms of integration of young people of color and advanced learners at the secondary level, particularly the high schools, doesn't feel like a sound option to me. And I think it's a compliment to you all that it's hard to find inefficiency in the budget. It's hard to identify where you can shift funding to prioritize all of the very important work that's happening. But speaking very specifically to those two amendments, I would advise us to look elsewhere.
As I always spoke at the legal point of order, I never stated my opinion, and I apologize for that. I do think, as much as it hurts me to put a hold on LEAP, and as much as it hurts me to put a hold on the mental health, if we don't have teachers, we don't have a school. And therefore, I would be in support of this.
Any other feedback on this strategic equity?
Yeah, I'm not in favor of these cuts. I'm very much in favor of making sure that all of our staff have the 2.44% increase, combining the COLA with the base wage. I mean, looking at the steps plus base wage, that's the impact on someone's paycheck, and that's how I look at the increase. And I know that our EAs, our security staff, our custodial staff, there's a lot of people, our non-teachers are not included. We have gotten to that. But I also favor getting the state budget and making those decisions. And I wouldn't want to hold us back from these important investments, strategic equity investments, that I believe staff has worked hard on to identify how we move forward. And the status quo isn't acceptable. And I certainly don't want to do it, though, on the by taking it away from our staff. But I believe that when we have the state budget, we will be able to do this in a way that is able to make these investments and is able to get our staff to that 2.44. And I guess that's the only question I have for Kelly is if we get the $200 per student, and I know that I sent an email about this, I have not seen what the number is, in order to get all staff to that 2.44% base wage plus steps, how much is that going to cost, and will we in fact have the money to do that if the $200 is approved?
Would be able to vary in base wage plus steps equaling 2.44.
But for all, not on average, for all staff.
Using like a
Stipend
a base or a stipend as a way of giving some employees funding who don't have a step schedule. That would be the way to get there, and it would be possible at that.
Ananda and Chris. Ananda, what? I didn't. Did you? Oh, you didn't? No. Okay, Chris. I'm so confused, though. My hand is not up, but I'm super confused. Okay.
I want to respond to what Mary said, and I completely agree that we have some employees who are not on any kind of a step or lane schedule, and we need to compensate them so that their salaries are keeping up with the rate of inflation. However, we have employees who are on the step and lane schedule who will not get a full cost of living increase because the step and lane schedule is front-loaded. In your first 7 years of employment in MMSD, you get more money than you get later on. So it's essentially, if we're trying to retain experienced staff, which I think every school district wants to do, and we're trying to do that by making sure everybody's pay equals the cost of living, we actually would have to look at every point in the step schedule and what we'd have to add to that to make sure everybody gets up to 2.44% if we're really committed to doing that. I think for solidarity and for simplicity, it's just easier to pass the cost of living amendment, so.
So, Chris, the challenge is you can't budget on an individual by individual
can't do
basis.
that.
So the answer to that is working on the step schedule for our teachers, and particularly for all of our unions that didn't go through the work this last summer. We haven't reviewed some of the non-teacher step schedules in a while because we spent our whole summer on the teacher schedule. That's how you get there in a long-term sustainable way. You can't get there in a short-term sustainable way. It's simply not sustainable on this budget.
But I think we need to look at sustainability different. It's also not sustainable to not compensate people in a way that their salaries are keeping up with the cost of living and they're getting a little bit of extra to reward them for their work. And the only way to do that is to have a step schedule and to pay people a cost of living adjustment. And I think we have to take that definition of sustainability into account when we're looking at our budgets in January and deciding how we sustain this district as a place where people want to work and where experienced staff stay.
So what I find it confusing is the process, and I have a lot of respect for you, Kelly, and you, Lisa, for putting this, and I understand the complexities of scrubbing the budget and work with estimated numbers from the state and whatnot. What I find it confusing is that we say there's competing commitments, and to me, one of those commitments are not in competition with the others, right? The commitment of paying living wage and, making sure that folks have the COLA and not being in the gray area to me, is not in competition with the other investments. And so to me, that is, like a no conversation. Like, we needed to make sure that happens. And then there's the conversation about the investments that the administration is proposing, which they are very solid, and I fully support. We have had lots of opportunities to have conversations on them, and I appreciate the work that administration has done to package for us and making sure that we clarify. So this is where I feel confused, is that, and I don't know if that's like how it is everywhere, whatever the rationale for it, it just feels really crappy right now.
The board had the opportunity, and I understand there's a number of new board members. The board had the opportunity between January and March. We had a very specific conversation with very specific numbers about what it would take to fund at a different level than where we are in the budget right now. The directional authority that board gave us at this point, it got us to where we are today. So I just want to stress that the point in time in the budget cycle is between January and March.
Go for it, Jen. I was just going to add, so that was initial input, and of course, you gave us a certain level of authority for bargaining with MTI when it comes to compensation, which is where we're at. I think this is complicated. I mean, yeah, it is. And the way we've planned, based on the direction of the board, is that when we get the full budget from DPI is when we make final decisions on compensation, and not before. Can you do it? You can, Chris, right? There absolutely have been years where the board said, we're going to actually go beyond what was originally budgeted and even negotiated. You can. What we're saying is the right thing to do is to wait until you have all information so you can try to get as much of this budget accomplished as you possibly can. It's about being able to give as much as we can. I think going through and scrubbing this one more time, this is what we're supposed to be doing right now. This is healthy. If there are things that you aren't totally sure we must do at this point, right, to move the district forward, then put them in the reserve. Right? That gives you even more cushion beyond what the state may give you once we have a budget that you can put towards whatever you want. You could beef up the Black Excellence Fund a little bit more. You could put even more on comp, right? I mean, we want to make sure that you're not locking yourself in too soon and then, regretting that later on either. And there are lots of different ways to get staff towards the maximum amount of compensation that we can afford, which, because it's not just an annual investment, right? It layers on year after year. That goes on to the base of that salary schedule. So we're just trying to keep it flexible for you. So I mean, I think what's interesting to me, I mean, the advanced learning, Chris's proposal, we already heard some energy around holding on the high school position. Certainly could hold on the LEAP FTE. If you're going to hold on something, we would agree that's something worth doing. I do worry a little bit about reducing the BEP PD as dramatically as you proposed.
Ananda was waiting.
Yeah,
I haven't waited
okay.
yet, just before.
I just want to just mention that because you did go through a 9-month process coming up with those recommendations, and now you're cutting that in half. So
I actually like where you're going, Jen, because I did hear you say that one of the things that are struggling right now is that if we don't allocate the budget, some of the items that we're asking that potentially could be, that we're looking at reduction, that we're not going to be able to allocate staff. And then I'm thinking in my head, you know, the staff that are now faced with looking at, that's what we're going to get is 0.5, that we're losing that staff, right? So like I hear that. So what I'm wondering is a little bit of where you're going to, like, what are some of the things aside from what you already mentioned about the AEL at the high school and potentially some other things that could be scrubbed, I guess, for lack of a better word. And then what are some of the things that maybe the investment is in a couple parts, or however, that's what I'm like actually looking at. Like there's some creativity around that we don't feel as nervous on the amount, but then we, once this DPI comes up with like we have a better clarity that there is a commitment to that investment.
And I would just add, you don't have to drag the process out. I mean, a lot of this is dependent on whether or not we get a budget from the state as promised, right? If that goes beyond the end of this month, well, we're just going to have to deal with it. But if it does come out as planned, you don't have to drag this out. I mean, you 2 weeks later, if you wanted, you could bring back some of the strategic equity investments if you needed. You could put more on comp, right? Like, we're not asking you to wait necessarily. And maybe you can say more about this, Kelly, but I don't think what we're saying is that you wait 2 months to figure it out. But we need all information so that we're making the best possible decisions. We got a new governor, it's a new deal, and we just want to make sure that we're making the best possible decisions for everyone.
Okay, so I haven't jumped in yet, and I mean I think we're trying to do a couple of kind of delicate things tonight. One of the reasons I think this discussion's a little bit tricky is that we've had 3 people turnover on the board who, I mean, haven't had the benefit of participating in kind of building up a lot of the budget. For me, the 0.5% has always been a bit challenging to base the budget on for this exact reason. And COLA is different than steps and lanes in my mind. And so I'd like to, I guess a couple of these I'm curious about, Chris. I don't love the process, to be honest, but I am curious about the last 4 actually in this list. Advanced learning is for me, one of the areas that we can do the most for our kids by investing in more. I would probably pivot that role towards K-8, but I wouldn't give up the role. I just think that there's so much opportunity to support our kids more with particular curricular support, not just bodies. So for me, that one kind of is table stakes. I'm actually curious about turning the second one into part of the Black Excellence Fund. I mean, that's a central office role as it's created right now, and I would just be really curious if we put that money into the Black Excellence Fund. Is that actually the role that our community would come up with? I don't know. It's not mine to answer that question, but it's, I guess, a question for me. And then the last 3, I would be open to holding on and putting into a reserve for a later date. So I don't know, that's just kind of feedback, Chris, in terms of your thought process there.
I want to clarify. I think there's like 2 different versions of this floating around at this point. Yeah, because I took the feedback and I sent out a new version of it over the weekend. And so I actually took out, I kept here's the 4 bullets at this point, is delaying the high school position for advanced learning, but not the KE positions.
Okay. So your last 3.
And the feeder pattern social worker, the 1.0 LEAP FTE, and then
So your last 3.
delaying that $100,000 investment, but not necessarily not investing in BEP professional development, but just using some of our existing resources to invest in BEP professional development.
The last 3 then.
Okay.
I'm not sure that we have any degree of consensus.
At this point, I'm not hearing that I would be taking anything out of the strategic equity. The only one I'm hearing kind of seemingly close might be the LEAP FTE.
It's hard to know without a vote, so.
Holly, did you have?
No, I mean, similarly, I was wondering, like, what is our process around this amendment and whether or not we're creating a reserve using this amendment. The vast majority of the amendment I'm not in favor of. I also had a question about what you just did in terms of saying.
I was responding to one of the ones that was removed.
Right, so if you're saying we pull this out, we're adding this funding to Black Excellence, I'm like, that's different than what I'm hearing Chris say.
It is.
And I think
it was a pivot, not a.
Yeah, and so. Yeah, I guess I'm wondering how we're going to determine where we stand on these amendments, and I think I would really appreciate like separating where we stand on these amendments is different than where we stand on salary increase or cost of living, and that's the only way I can participate. So if it is tied together in terms of how we're going to establish the amendment, then I need to know.
Kelly, what's your guidance?
My guidance is that any reductions, I'm hearing general support from the board that we take, I would put it in a reserve for the budget. And how the board uses that
And if you
reserve
don't
would be
hurt-
up for a later discussion.
Yeah.
In closed session would be my recommendations because we are in the middle of negotiation.
Yeah. And if you don't hear
And if I
general
don't
consensus.
hear general consensus, if anything being pulled out of the strategic equity projects, our typical process is we don't amend our own budget. That's true. This is our budget, right? And if I'm not hearing consensus to pull it out now, the budget goes forward to the board on June 24th.
And we
if
would
amendment
vote on
goes
these
forward from a board
individually.
member, it goes to the typical amendment process, and if it gets pulled out, then it would go into the reserve.
I would agree, and Chris, I mean, this is hopefully good information for you too, that'll help you think about any further adjustments you might want to make to your amendment before you put it on the table.
Okay, anything else on the strategic equity investments? All right, let's talk about the last ones then, and we'll move on. So I think we're saying at this point that Chris, these would be your amendments to bring to the floor as
I choose.
you choose.
Yeah. Okay.
And
I
Kate,
think
the
that's-
LEAP and
that's
stays
true
in,
on
correct?
Simpson Street, too.
What was that?
The LEAP FTE stays in, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, and then, so the same thing holds for Simpson Street as
Same
well?
thing holds for Simpson Street. We're not going to build it in, but if Nikki wants to bring that amendment
Yeah.
next week, she absolutely can.
All right.
All right, so then we move to the third section of the budget amendments, which are those reductions to school-based and central office department funding. This is another one where Chris did send some kind of amendments, post-board materials being posted. What I will say at the kind of the highest levels, where these reductions are being found or were being recommended, which is at purchased services and non-capital object codes. I do want to acknowledge that these are very high-level object codes. DPI tells us how we record things so that they can bring it all together all across the state and report up to the feds. So these are very large buckets, and I can appreciate that purchase services, non-capital, supplies can all sound kind of fluffy. But what I want to make sure you know are there are very important expenses tied to these objects codes that support schools, that support operations, that are the very facilities that attempt to keep that pool at West up and running, and that support our staff. And so I'll just say that for now, that I've scrubbed all of these line items. I've cut somewhere between 3 and 5 million almost every single year since the first day I've started. I've been on that team. I practically have these line items memorized by now. It's 171 pages of account lines that I've personally looked at. And there isn't fat left in these lines. If it existed 5 years ago, Lisa and I have found it. I shouldn't be saying myself. Lisa has been part of this ongoing excruciating work. We've identified it and we've found it. So I'll just put that forward, and Kate, you can kind of organize how you want the rest of this to go.
Sure. So first I'll clarify that after getting Kelly's analysis of these possible cuts, I changed them because, in particular, everything that was in personal services, it was pretty clear to me we shouldn't be cutting. So I took those out immediately. I left things in that I felt would not directly impact our children in our classrooms. Things like we could cut back on some conference travel. We're getting VoIP phones. I would hope that our phone bill will drop because there was no change in the amount of money we have budgeted for phones last year and this year, despite the fact that we're shifting to voice over internet, which should reduce our phone costs, I hope. And according to the memo we got, that transition's supposed to be happening by August. It might be behind. I'm not sure. The supplies is harder, but I think it would actually be helpful to know more about the curriculum replacement rate. And the board, I think, has never really, we get lists every month in the consent agenda of stuff we're buying, but we never actually get like a high level view of over the next 3 years, what's our curriculum plan? What are we replacing? What are we continuing? What investments are we making? And what do those investments cost? I think, if we can't make a cut to this right now, and I understand that, it would at least be helpful for the board to know more details about what's happening with curriculum, so we can make decisions down the road. I know our policies actually have room for a curriculum committee, which I don't think we've ever done, but might actually be useful at this point. Space rental for meetings. I think we could try to do more with the space we have internally or with our partners to get space that costs less and save some money. Then there's the 7 unfilled central office vacancies. And I know anytime you say leave a vacancy unfilled, it's really, really tough. And I guess my feeling at the end of the day is that we're asking to take, for this piece of it, $1.65 million out of a $450 million budget, and without harming our children in our classrooms. And the fact that we've seen 58% growth in non-union professionals over the past, since the 2013-14 school year, despite declining enrollment, tells me this is one area that we could probably hold back on spending because we've got a lot of capacity. We've grown so fast in that area. And that's why I put it out there. Every other line of employees has dropped or grown a very small amount, but non-union professionals has grown exponentially. And so I also know, my understanding is non-union professionals aren't contract employees, so if something was considered absolutely critical, there could be some shifting of positions or FTE so that the critical positions got filled. So I'd like to hear your feedback on that. I appreciate how difficult it is to be scrubbing lines and then get a board member who's trying to scrub more, and I want to thank you for putting up with that, but also just put out there that if there is anything else we can trim from this budget, our staff are worth it.
So in response to the NUP question, there's a paragraph in the budget book explaining exactly that. The increase in NUPs is caused by a couple of things over time. One is that HR made a decision a handful of years ago to reduce the administrative contracts and start issuing non-union professional contracts. So the NUP line went up at the time as the administrative line went down. On the opposite end, there was an HR decision to move a number of teacher leader contracts up from the teacher leader and into the NUP category, primarily so that they could work longer. Our teacher leaders were, and Lisa can add all onto this, she spearheaded the effort, but to make sure our teacher leaders were still around at the end of the year, we were paying extreme amount of bills of kind of extended employment because we kept calling them back. And so the idea was to restructure the position so that we could actually use them when we needed them. And then in addition to that, the board has had priority project investments over the year, and those positions have been through this whole process and through the board member scrutiny, just the same conversations we've had over the years. Advanced learner positions have been added, for example, that have also added into that. So that's the response regarding the NUPs. The idea of closing any of these positions and then moving someone into those roles is a bit problematic because the vacancies that are open are quite specialized skill sets. Not anyone can lead our entire IT team on how our software, interrelates and how the data moves between our software systems. That's a pretty specialized role here in the district. And if we were to have to cut another position to open up in an FTE, all we're doing at that point is laying off someone in central office as they're about to start a new school year. So it's a bit late to be laying off, but it is factually correct that a NUPS contract would mean you could lay them off at any point in time.
Any comments? Yeah.
So I do want to ask, if we're going to talk about the amendments, if we can emphasize what's being amended versus what we would use the funding for. That would be particularly helpful to me, because I think that just complicates the conversation in which you're not saying no to the amendment, you're saying no to what the alternate use of funding. And so I think if we can move forward speaking to the amendment and what it would mean to cut that as the place of emphasis, it would create a more fluid conversation. It would also I don't like kind of hanging on the balance of whether or not it's a conflict of interest. So it'd just be incredibly helpful to me moving forward.
Could we do a weekly update? I should have raised my hand, I'm sorry. Could we possibly do a weekly update along with the discussion?
I think what I'm hearing from Ollie is if for folks who are writing amendments, if we write them differently, is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm asking in discussion of the amendment, if we can discuss, hey, the amendment is specifically to reduce funding to this area. The emphasis being what are the implications of that versus what are we now able to afford? Because I think those are separate conversations. And so I want to have a clear understanding of the impact of the amendments you're speaking to. And I greatly appreciate, Chris, that you've gone through and identified areas in which you think we have more flexibility. And I think there's some real strength in what you're talking about. I think disconnecting them from the utilization of the funding beyond it going into a reserve is helpful for me in terms of participation. That being said, I think really honing in on personal services is up there, but you're saying that one
I took it out.
Took off, so
Yeah.
that's the largest, right? That's $500,000. Looking at employee travel, communication, and supplies and space rentals for meetings, I think, understanding to a greater extent what the impact of that would be really helpful. Although I think some of those things seem very, very, very low numbers, honestly, given the amount of people who work for the district. And some of those are direct investments in staff and their interests and their ability to build up their skills in specific areas. And so I would hate to stop investing in staff in one way in order to invest in staff in another way. And that is what some of this speaks to for me. And so if I could have greater clarity around that impact, it would be really helpful.
Kate, is it helpful for us to do just a quick, description of the impact of for each of these areas? I mean, it's in the grid.
It's in this.
Yeah, it's in there,
Yeah.
but we're happy to do that quick.
If you can do
that's
it
helpful.
very quickly, we're just.
Sure. So skipping over personal services, because that has been pulled by Chris. So in the employee travel line, there's only about $350,000 in the whole line left that's not tied to something already tied to the employee handbook that this board would need to change. So of the $300,000, getting to Elise's point, it's not a lot on a per pupil basis. There are just a few items that are in the $20,000 range that might, rise to the occasion of the discussion, but that includes the professional development for secondary teachers entering pathways. It's a very intentional training kind of process for our pathways team and our new pathways teachers. There is training for our curriculum and instruction leaders who then go into schools and train, but the majority of that is kind of matched in a grant from DPI. And then there is a small, about $20,000 that we set aside for any of the new technology schools that we put the teachers through professional development and the leaders through those, to kind of onboard them into the tech plan. We're almost done with the tech plan. So down the road in a year or two, that funding is likely to go away. Potentially could be cut at that time. But at this point, we would want to finish up those particular schools. And then we have some funding in that line, which is the travel to support the HBCU for our HR department, for our diversity recruiting. That was something that the board just added into the budget in recent years for that particular recruiting. Above and beyond that, there is no single line item that is of any significance. You have, individual teachers going to a DPI conference. It's probably worth noting that conference fees themselves are actually included in this. That's part of DPI's org structure. Do you want me pausing or just
have
go through?
Quick question, if I may. Just on the board rentals, that was always my question. How much do we pay on the rental properties, and is there a way to better utilize it?
We're going to get there.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all that was my main question.
I also wanted to add around the travel to the question that there actually was sort of layers underneath this. So Kelly and I went through the budget already and pulled the costs for substitutes for professional development for teachers. Like, we actually skinnied that down because of the sub shortage. We have 6 professional development days next year, and those days are planned for and implemented at the school level. So some of this money, in terms of an investment in staff, part of it is we want to be able to have our staff grow and learn, but we don't want to have to get a sub. We don't want to have to do it on a professional development day, and having teachers come in to do professional development after school is exhausting after they've worked all day long. So this actually, a cut in this area would actually compromise the amount of support that we'd be able to provide to teachers, given those other decisions we've already made.
Thank you all so much for answering my question.
If you
Okay.
have you can just roll
So
forward.
in the communications line, there's about, it's not a, not a very big line. There's about $30,000 for the advertising. This is what's required to post kind of your board meetings, RFP notices,
And Kelly, I
et
want to
cetera.
clarify, I took that out.
What's that?
The only thing I left in the communications line was printing and binding and the phones.
So in total, the printing and binding budget for the entire district is $100,000. I just want to note that that is not a lot of money for a district our size. We have taken incredible feats to reducing our printing and budget. We reduced it by 50% in the 18-19 school year, and I took a little bit of a cut already this year as part of the $1 million. So this line item is getting pretty thin at $100,000 left for the year. Potentially we'll get to zero someday when, we're all electronic, but we're moving in that direction.
Go almost all electronic. Professional development, all principal meetings are all electronic. We barely print anything these days, just to put it in context.
We also get donations for a lot of the things you might see printed in the public.
So I do want to speak to that, though, as something that if we're talking about like an equity lens, right? Like who has access to their phone at work to check on like their kid's schedule or any other thing versus who like relied on the calendar given out at the beginning of the year. That is an issue of equity. And so I appreciate the level of efficiency folks bring to the budget, and I think like there is a necessity to like print things, and I don't think that I think we would want to be really thoughtful before moving to all digital, and I think even in looking at the cuts that have taken place, I think they've taken place out of necessity, not just because like that's the more efficient way to do things.
Yeah. So on the telephone, it is true that we're moving to VoIP. We're not there yet, and therefore we're not utilizing the savings yet. I do not recommend that you cut it. I think if you cut it, it's probably a false cut right now, meaning we're likely to go over budget at the end of the year if you were to cut it. I would recommend that we look at this in 2021. You're going to need cuts then too, then that year, and will probably just be a much safer cut a year from now. The other line that Chris was recommending cuts to is the supply line. I think it's very important to recognize that our curriculum and instruction budget is largely comes out of here, and again, that's the DPI coding. But our curriculum purchase cycle, our textbooks, our worksheets all go through this line. When you're like what you probably think about supplies, there's $665,000. That's our cleaning supplies to clean our schools and the toilet paper. We have some testing materials in here. Much of that is reimbursed, but you would see that if you were looking in the line. The state reimburses it, and our AP fees we collect from parents that pays for that as well. So our science supplies, the microscopes, that's about $30,000. There's not a lot of funding in here above and beyond the curriculum purchases. At least, do you have more to say on that?
So in terms of the CLRM, I can expand a little bit on. So we actually are underfunded in that line item compared to other districts. I would say that we're finally getting schools what they need around interventions for students. We are planning on a new K-5 literacy adoption next year. Our core materials in elementary literacy are 10 years old. And we have had to backfill some gaps for secondary materials. We're still sort of catching up from 7 years ago on that. We have also, some of you might remember this, Lexia and some of our software licenses, we took off of Title I so that schools could have Title I funds to spend per pupil, and we put it in the CLRM budget. I know that I always sit with curriculum and instruction at this time of the year, and you guys, they ask for more than we can fund. So we cut the social and emotional learning curriculum, so all of the departments put in their materials orders, including our pathways, our science, some of our other technical secondary course loads, including AP. And we always have to cut off the bottom. We can never fund what all the requests are. So I would just urge us to maintain that amount so that we can continue to support the materials that teachers need.
And the last item that hasn't yet been discussed, that's on kind of Chris's reduction list, is on space rental. So there's $100,000 that we spend annually on space rental. Again, not a large amount when you think about the size of this district. The space rentals are tied to, as you would assume, our principal meetings, our SBLT institutes, which we cannot get all of our principals in one room in a professional development learning center in a space that we own, because those meetings happen during the school day. Our kids are using our gyms. When we don't have school and we can put them in a school, we always do. We have our welcome back and our new teacher kind of PD. I think we did it at Memorial and the Follett at the last couple of years. So we always use our schools when we can. They're just usually full. And we try to go to our kind of our nonprofit partners that have community space a lot. We actually often outwear our welcome at some of these places because we use them so much. But these expenses otherwise are the Urban League. We tend to use that room for community meetings. Goodman Center, we tend to use those meetings for our community centers. They're often our nonprofit partners who have these spaces that we can use in the community.
If I could just add, Kate, we don't present this to you to be resistant to making more cuts. We're just wanting to give you a realistic view, because we do try to run the budget as tight as we reasonably can each year.
How about the food budget? We have like $100 and some odd $1,000 for food at meetings and stuff, which is a luxury I think most state agencies and taxpayer-funded groups have had to let go of.
So a large portion of our budget that's spent on food is for community and parent feedback sessions. So Jen might have her parent advisory group. They're often in the evening, and there might be some snacks there available. frankly, the pizza that you guys might have at a board meeting would be in that supply line. Student centers at the high schools, like by our process for what we can use food on, by and large, community, parent, and student events are what the food is for. For the events that I think you're thinking of, Chris, which are the, the principal or the SBLT institutes, those are full day events. And if we send staff off-site, we lose an entire hour plus of just critical time with really important leaders. We try to end those meetings at the time where they can go back and check in on their school or, still do work at the end of the day. So we tend to not want to send them off-site. And even at that, you're looking at about $50,000 in the budget. It's nowhere near the total line item.
I mean, we use our food services for lunch.
Uh-huh.
Those guys, everyone takes turns bringing snacks. Like we split up the costs. Principals sign up to bring something for breakfast in the morning. So so you could cut it. You certainly could. But we wouldn't recommend it.
Okay, I propose that we begin to wrap this discussion up. I appreciate the detail that you guys have provided, and I mean, I also think many of us would like to find other areas in the budget that we could and should do more. I've asked you this question before, Kelly, and we don't need to talk about it now, but your guidance on where, if anywhere, there is upside in the budget I would appreciate that. That can come in a weekly update. I mean, I know every year we do run behind in some areas and ahead in others, and you need the ability to balance that out. But maybe just to check in at this phase in the process. I think you did one maybe in November-ish or something like that.
And we can remind the board where we already have made cuts for repurposing, which we do every year. I mean, there were certainly categories of cuts that we've already built into the budget.
That'd be great.
Okay. Any other comments or questions before we adjourn this meeting?
I think what I'm hearing is we're not going to build in any of these amendments at this point either. And I think it's more to has Chris gotten what she needs before bringing this to the full board for a vote.
Yeah, I think what I heard was there was not a lot of support for the proposed cuts. We didn't actually talk about additional state dollars, which is fine. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. We are adjourned.
Okay, we're gonna go ahead and start. This is the June 10, 2019 Special Board of Education meeting and open session workshop. Today we're gonna be talking about the SRO contract. Matt, if you could provide the board an update of where we are on the contract?
Certainly. So I'm going to give a high-level overview of the contract that has been negotiated thus far. And I'm looking at the red line version, if anyone else is following along. I'm going to start on page 2. And again, I'm just going to highlight the major changes. On page 2, the major change being that during, either at the beginning or in the middle of the 2021 school year, we have the ability to remove one SRO from one of our comprehensive high schools. Moving on to page 4, either the board or the city has the ability to terminate the contract, and that would be effective on June 2021, so at the conclusion of the 2021 school year. The term and renewal of the currently negotiated contract, it would start August 1st of 2019, and it would cover the 1920, 2021, and 21-22 school years. And it would end officially on June 15th of 2022, unless we or the city exercise that early termination clause. Finally, I would like to note on page A6, which is particularly paragraph 6, and this was an attempt to collaboratively work with the city, between the MMSD and the city, to review data. And I'm just going to read a few portions of this here. The data that they're required to review must be disaggregated by race, gender, and disability. We're going to be looking at the type of offenses, the trends related to reporting of crimes, in particular, who's calling SROs, whether it's the SROs or whether it's our own staff. And most importantly, based upon that analysis, the MPD and the MMSD shall work collaboratively to identify all possible causes of disproportionality and develop steps to eliminate it. Those are the major changes that have been made to the contract that I bring back to the board for your discussion and vote.
Great, thank you. So tonight I move that the Board of Education enter into the school resource officer contract with the City of Madison for the period of August 1st, 2019 through June 15, 2022, as set forth in the document prepared for the Special Board of Education meeting dated June 10th, 2019. Discussion? We'll go ahead we've had significant discussion over this very important topic. A lot of community engagement on this. If we could just go around the table and give brief remarks on this topic, and we'll go ahead and vote. No discussion? All right. All in favor of approving the contract? Say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
Aye. Nay.
Sure.
Thank you. Nay.
Okay. The contract passes.
4-3.
All right. That is the only item on the agenda. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Second.
The whole contract or just the amendment?
Second.
That's the whole
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned.
Thank you.
What's the whole contract?